Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, and your boy on Twitter at MMALOTN. This week we're going over UFC 259. We got a triple header of title fights here. We got the light heavyweight title fight between Jan Blachowicz and Adesanya. We got the women's featherweight scrap between Amanda Nunes and Megan Anderson. And then the one that I'm looking forward to the most is the bantamweight scrap between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. Absolute fire fight. I cannot wait for this card. There are so many amazing fights on this card. Alexander Rakic versus Thiago Santos. Joseph Benavidez against Askarov. Dominick Cruz against Kenney. Just bangers after bangers after bangers, not to mention the return of Islam Makhachev going up against the streaking Drew Dober. Very, very impressive, or very, very intriguing fight, I should say. But this card is littered with great fights. As of me recording this fight, we have 15 fights scheduled for this weekend. Probably by fight time, it's going to go down to like 13 or 12. But hopefully we don't lose anything from the main card. And hopefully we don't lose some of those prelim bangers as well, too. But very, very fun card coming up. I can't wait to break it down for you guys. Well, I've already broken it down for you guys. You guys will see it very, very shortly. But yeah, very much looking forward to this fight. This pay-per-view is probably going to be one of the best of the year. And we've only had a couple pay-per-views thus far. So very much looking forward to seeing this one and seeing how these title fights shape out as well too. All right, let's get into the betting recap of UFC Vegas 20, which was last weekend. And we had another losing event, man. This year has been tough. It's been a very, very tough year, especially with the lock of the night plays going 1-6 this year. The only one hitting was Kamaru Usman. But yeah, I want to distance myself as much as possible from like January because I felt like the lock of the night plays that I made there were just very poor. Again, I've already talked about this. I've gone over it again, but like these last two plays or last three plays, including the Kamaru Usman one as well, I don't regret them at all. Like these are high level fighters that are going out there and just shit happening. The Curtis Blades one, not mad at that. Again, I got the inside the distance line at minus 167, so I thought I got a great line there. Very low percentage outcome that happens with Mr. Derek Lewis getting the knockout there. But about UFC Vegas 20, let's talk about the one win first and foremost. I had 0.5 units on Alexis Davis at plus 173. That cashes for 0.87 units. Wish I went harder on that one. You know, I mean, my women's MMA calls this year have been absolutely fire. Like that's the only bright spot of my 2021 so far is I'm 7-1 on women's MMA fights for plus 12.5 units or something like that for 150% ROI. So maybe I should focus more so on the women's, maybe WLOTN, women's lock of the night. I don't know, but yeah, that's been really the only bright spot. Everything else has pretty much gone to shit. So let's talk about the other dog plays that I had. I had one unit on Montana De La Rosa at plus 117 against Myro Bueno Silva. That ends up going to a draw. Can't be mad at that. Bueno Silva does a decent job of keeping the fight on the feet and doing some good work from there. The Kevin Kroom fight, I had one unit at plus 175 against Caceres. Man, that one looked bad. Kevin Kroom's cardio has always looked good based off of everything that I've seen off of tape. So to see him have as much of a cardio dump as he had in that fight against Caceres was very, very embarrassing. You know what I mean? I don't like betting on guys that have cardio issues. That's almost like number one on my list in terms of when I'm looking for people to bet on. You got to have cardio. And his cardio was just absolutely horrendous that night. And so we lose one unit there. Also, minus 2 units on Alexander Hernandez. Props and hats off to Thiago Moises for implementing that calf kick right off the bat and just making it a very, very tough night for Hernandez. I think once the calf kick really started to set in for Hernandez, he was pretty much debilitated at that point. We saw Thiago Moises have a ton of success on the feet, and that very much did surprise me at the time. Pre-tape, pre-fight, I don't regret the shot. You know what I mean? I just didn't expect to see Thiago Moises come with that type of game plan. But yeah, I will definitely step off of Alexander Hernandez a little bit more moving forward. So, yeah, minus 2 units there. And then obviously the lock of the night play was a parlay between Magomed Ankalaev, goes out there, does what he does. Probably should have just made him my parlay or my lock of the night play straight. And then Jimmy Rivera, minus 144. He was the second leg of the parlay. And again, the calf kicks absolutely fuck us that night. Pedro Munoz gets it going right off the bat. I truly expected to see, Jimmy Rivera either able to check those or, get out of the way of those and truly get his boxing game going, because he needs his movement. He needs that ability to move in and out of, pocket exchanges and then pivoting off of these combinations. But Pedro Munoz did a good job of just sticking with it and, really making it difficult for Rivera to get his game off. And yeah, I don't regret it to the biggest extent. There's a reason I put 4 units on instead of 5. I was very, very confident in Rivera in the spot. But great game plan from Pedro Munoz. He comes back, avenges that loss from earlier in his career against Jimmy Rivera. But we end up minus 6.13 units on the night. Just not a good look. We did have it's been a tough little run. I've already talked about how I want to switch up my approach. I'm going old school lock of the night on these people now. And one thing I want to say is that, like, back in the day when I was like starting this off and had that early success, it was just completely unhindered by what I was hearing from the community, or when I was involving myself in all these Twitter discussions and kind of being pressured by other guys from being like, this is a square bet. If you're betting a minus 230, even if it cashes, it's a square bet, but it cashes. And that's what I'm looking at the end of the day. So, when I was killing the game, it was like, cashing between minus 180s and minus 285s on a regular basis. But I felt like I was getting scared away from that stuff just to seem a little bit sharper than I am compared to some of these other guys that are like really good at, calling these minus 120s, minus 130 favorites. Now, I'm pretty decent with my underdogs as well, right? Like, the underdogs have been coming pretty solid for me as of late, but it's the closer line fights that are kind of fucking me. So moving forward, I'm probably just doing one lock of the night play for either 3.5 to 5 units on it, and then just a dog of the night play between 1 and 2 units on those spots as well too. So yeah, that's the lock of the night approach. We're going old school on these bitches, and I'm hoping that it's gonna get us back onto the right track. Get back to those 7, 8, 9 event winning streaks, and do what I do, which is finding the lock of the night plays regardless of the odds. Obviously, I'll never bet anything worse than minus 350, but because I just set that limit myself. But that's the approach that I'm going to be going moving forward, and hopefully it turns things around for us, because man, this was a tough start to the year, tough first 2 months, but I'm looking to turn around here at UFC 259. And I got all the motivation in the world. I got a really good lock of the night play already lined up. I believe you guys will figure it out once I talk about it on this podcast and break down that specific fight. And I really like the dog of the night play I have as well. So really, really looking forward to UFC 259 this week. And I think I got some really good spots, and I'm hoping that I can capitalize on it as well too. All right, before we get into the breakdowns, a couple plugs that I want to do right off the bat. The Patreon, obviously. Don't want to tout it too much at this point in time. Again, my picks are always free. They drop on Fridays, but the Patreon is there if you want early access to the breakdowns. Picks as soon as I drop them and as soon as I place them, because obviously the lines probably won't be the same come the day that I drop it to the public. Got a great Discord community as well too. Everybody's super supportive, super helpful. They drop other plays as well too, so shout out to those guys. And the best bets and props article as well too, which is pretty much going through every single fight, giving you the best bet and the best prop. And now something that I added as of last week was a confidence rating on it as well too. So given that I'll be giving out less official plays moving forward, I wanted to add a confidence rating on these bets that I'm putting in that article to at least give people an idea of, okay, if I was betting more, these are the other spots that I'd probably be hitting. So, I think people are really finding that helpful, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how it pans out moving forward. So, Patreon, the link is in the description below. $5 a month, ton of value in my opinion. We'll never change it from $5 a month. I do have a $10 tier, which is no different than the $5 one, other than just if you guys want to be a little bit more generous and you appreciate you guys' work, all the hard work that I'm putting into this thing. So I appreciate you guys checking out the Patreon. And then secondly, my affiliation agreement with Coolbet. If you guys sign up with Coolbet.com, use the promo code MMALOTN2, that's the number 2, you guys get 100% matched bonus on your initial deposit up to $200. Now, this isn't available in the States. It's just Canada, and I believe a bunch of Scandinavian countries as well too. But I love this site. I make most of my bets on this site. They have great odds. You're able to parlay props. They got a ton of great props as well too. But I love Coolbet, I should say. And they've been nothing but great to me. Got a great response thus far with the affiliation code, so I hope to keep it going. So if you guys are looking for a new bookie and you guys are in Canada or some of the other countries, again, it's all listed in the description below, so you guys can get some more information there. Yeah, check out Coolbet. Coolbet.com, promo code MMALOTN2. All right, that's pretty much a wrap on everything that I want to get out in this intro. Let's get into the breakdowns. I hope to help you guys out and cash some bets this week and enjoy the breakdowns. Mario Bautista versus Trevin Jones. We got minus 240 on Bautista and plus 200 on Trevin Jones. Let's start off on the Bautista side of things, who I believe opened around that minus 130 to minus 150 range, and we got some heavy love on him pretty much right off the bat, and it makes sense. The kid is an absolute beast. He's 8-1 in his career. He's 27 years old, and his only loss, I believe, came on short notice against Corey Sandhagen, where it was his first UFC fight. Short notice, like I said, but he was just completely outmatched and outskilled at that point in time. Corey Sandhagen, as we all know, just an absolute monster and a beast. So not the worst loss to have on your record. Then he goes out there and has a fight of the night against Jinsu Sun. A great fight where, both guys were swinging leather at each other, both guys landing big shots, but we saw the more damaging and the more versatile shots from Bautista, who just uses all 8 of his limbs to the best of its abilities. Great Muay Thai striker, great elbows, great knees, especially his knee up the middle, which is what he ended up catching Miles Johns with. Just absolute beauty. I believe it was a flying knee ultimately, but throughout that first round, we saw him land that knee almost at will, and it paid dividends for him later in that fight, where he was able to knock out Miles Johns in that second round. Came into that fight as a plus 115 underdog, and even in the Jinsu Sun fight, comes in as a plus 150 underdog. But now, the bookies and the public are starting to give Bautista the respect I believe he deserves, and I think this is a pretty well matched up fight for him against Trevin Jones. Now, I think the majority of Bautista's wins, not the majority, I'm saying the most likely path to victory is for Bautista to go out there and cruise to a possible decision victory. But I think if he gets a submission game going, he can give Trevin Jones some trouble here, as I believe that he's not going to be ready for what Bautista has to bring to him. A great striking game, like I said, from Bautista. He uses his range very well. His kicks are very good too, but his volume is definitely up there as well, which is where I think is going to give Trevin Jones problems. So maybe we see a desperate shot from Trevin Jones where maybe he gives up his back or something like that. But I think he's ultimately going to be forced to shoot here against Bautista, who should definitely have him covered in the jiu-jitsu realm. Now, Bautista is one of those guys out of the MMA lab who's training with guys like Kenney and Phillips, who are both also fighting on this card. So having guys all peak at the same time, going up against high-level competition, Kenney going up against Dominick Cruz, Phillips going up against Song Yadong, and now Mario Bautista going up against Trevin Jones. I think these guys will bring the best out of each other to truly peak on that night and go out and get a very dominant victory. So I like what we see from Bautista. A very aggressive striker. He doesn't really give his opponents the comfortability of just getting ready and getting set into a fight. He's going to push his game. He's going to push his game plan and really get you thinking about, okay, should I get my strikes off or should I just try to counter this guy? But while you're thinking that, he's probably going to hit you with a couple shots as well too. So I like Bautista in this fight. I completely understand why he's a minus 240 favorite. I think he's worth parlaying as well too. He should add decent enough value to your plays. Because Trevin Jones on the other side, I'm not the most impressed with the guy. He's 12-6. Coming over from the Guam scene, I believe he's fought an ACA a couple times, ACB, as well as Top FC, which is a Korean organization. He's been all over the place, right? He's definitely gathered a good amount of experience, but throughout all that experience, we don't truly see a fighter that I believe was going to reach the top 15, which I believe that Bautista will if he hasn't already. Obviously, we know Trevin Jones coming in on short notice against Timur Valiev, where we saw Valiev hurt him to the body early, almost get him out of there, and then absolutely blows his wad trying to get Jones out of there. And then in that second round, he's just way too tired, and we see Jones take advantage of that and put him out in that second round. So good win for him there. However, gets overturned to a no contest, and I believe it was due to a positive marijuana test. And I hate that they do that to guys that are coming in on short notice and almost doing the UFC a favor, and then they get fucked over because they maybe smoked weed even before they signed the contract, right? Same thing with Kevin Kroom. When he beat Roosevelt Roberts, took that fight on super short notice, test positive for weed after that, and they take away his win. So very unfortunate there for Kroom and for Jones. But, given what I've seen from the regional scene of Trevin Jones, he seems a little bit too lackadaisical in terms of letting his opponent set the pace. I think Bautista will continuously move forward, really put it on Jones, really, pressure him, not let Jones get his game off. And I think the only way Jones truly wins this fight is if he Hail Mary KOs Bautista here. I don't think he's going to out wrestle him. I don't think he's going to out jiu-jitsu him, nor do I think he's going to outstrike him or outpace him. So I think Bautista pretty much has him covered everywhere here. And I think Bautista is truly coming into his own now. Like, the guy's fully realizing his potential. Again, training with killers that he is at the MMA lab. I think he's a high-level guy, and this is just another stepping stone for him to kind of reach that that pinnacle of his talent. And Trevin Jones is just another guy in the way, and this should be probably one of his easier fights, I believe. Like, out of Miles Johns and Jinsu Sun, I'd say Jones is the third guy there, right? Like, at least Sun, I believe he has the durability. He keeps moving forward. He's going to make it a difficult fight for you because he's going to walk through all the shots that you're throwing at him, right? Just watch this Piotr Jan fight. The guy just did not back down no matter what Jan was throwing at him. And then Miles John, limited fighter, but he was undefeated going into that fight with Bautista, and Bautista just absolutely put it on him. So I'm expecting the same thing here. He's going to have a 2-inch height advantage as well, while he'll be at a 1-inch reach disadvantage. But I think we'll see that height advantage exaggerate that distance management, given how effective Bautista is with his strikes, his range management, and then just pretty much everything in his game. So I'm expecting a complete domination here from Bautista. I think he wins this fight, let's say via decision. No, you know what? I'm going to say via submission, first round. I think he just puts it on Jones, ends up getting this fight into the grappling situation, and pulls off a submission. So I'm going Bautista, first round submission. Aalon Cruz versus Uros Medic. We got minus 165 on Uros Medic and plus 145 on Aalon Cruz, who's making his second walk to the octagon. So let's start off with the Aalon Cruz side of things, who's coming off that loss to Spike Carlisle last time around where he got knocked out. I believe it was just over a minute worth of a fight. But we truly didn't get to see what Cruz really brings to the table, especially what we saw from him on the Contender Series and even prior in his career as well, right? Very good fighter from the outside, very long and lanky. He's 6 foot with a 78-inch reach. Originally fighting at featherweight, but now he's coming up to lightweight. So I'm interested to see how he looks. A little bit more filled out, a little bit more weight on him as well too, and how that translates to him and his performance. Another change for Aalon Cruz is he's moved his training camp from Tampa Bay all the way over to Vegas, and now he trains at Extreme Couture under the great mastermind. Damn, I can't remember the guy's first name, but I know his last name is Nixick. But Chris, I want to say, completely off on that. But either way, Coach Nixick, doing a really good job with the guys over there at Extreme Couture, and obviously getting a guy like Aalon Cruz under your wing. I'm sure he could do a lot of good things with this guy, given his frame, given the experience that he's already accrued, and how well he uses his distance, right? You're talking about a guy who's 6 foot with a 78-inch reach at lightweight. 78 inches. That's insane. There's a lot of guys that he has even a longer reach than in like the light heavyweight and heavyweight division. So it could definitely be a problem for most of his opponents if he's able to use it effectively. And from what I've been seeing in his last fights, he has been using it very effectively. Obviously, it didn't work out for him in the Spike Carlisle fight. He was rocked right off the bat after if you guys watch the head kick that initially started the finishing sequence, it looks like he thought he had raised his guard high enough to block the shot. Unfortunately for him, Spike Carlisle lands it clean just on his temple, and you see Aalon Cruz's eyes go all over the place, and that's where Spike jumps on the opportunity to go for the finish, and he successfully gets the finish. Now, this is a fight where Aalon Cruz went into it as a minus 200 favorite. and now he's coming into this fight as a plus 145 favorite. So it just shows you like the whole like what have you done for me lately type of thing that we have in MMA, especially with MMA betting. There's so many guys that go in there as decent favorite, they get knocked the hell out, and then people just throw them away. It reminds me of that like Toy Story meme where the kids, has one toy but he's dropping the other toy, and that's what it feels like happening right now with Uros Medic, who's the new toy, the fancy new toy compared to Aalon Cruz, who just for some reason nobody really respects as much anymore because he got knocked out last time. Now, if you go, I forgot who it was. I want to shout out, I believe it was Gugabe, who had originally said that you usually get a good return on guys that are coming off of first round knockouts, especially if it was their first, like their UFC debut or their second fight in the UFC. More often than not, you're getting a much better price for them next time around because most people are expecting them to go out there and get knocked out once again. But that doesn't really seem to be the case. The two that really come to mind for me are obviously Jake Collier when he got knocked out by Espinosa, and then he comes in against Gian Vellante as a sizable underdog. And then same with Parker Porter. He gets knocked out by Chris Daukaus, comes in as a sizable underdog against Josh Parisian, and both those guys pull off the wins. Obviously, there's a much other cases out there where you can make an argument for the other side, but I feel like it's very important here against Aalon Cruz and Uros Medic, who I believe that Cruz is actually the better fighter here. He's arguably gone up against much better competition, even though most of their fights have happened on the regional scene. But having a win over a guy like Steve Garcia and Nguyen as well, much more outranks whatever Uros has seen in the cage, right? You guys know that I like to fade guys that come out of Alaska FC, and Uros is definitely one of those guys. And to fade him at plus money, I might be there on the Cruz train. Now, how much did Cruz truly lose in terms of durability by getting knocked out by Spike Carlisle? Because his two losses before that were via submission. He never got knocked out. From what I've seen, he never really got dropped or anything on the tape that I've been able to run. So I think that Spike Carlisle fight was almost a bit of an anomaly. Whereas Uros Medic, we've only seen this guy for the longest fight he's ever been in is like 5 minutes and 51 seconds, like just a minute into the second round. We've never seen him even further into that, right? So there's a lot of question marks about how his cardio will look the further the fight goes on. Now we're talking about a camp change for Aalon Cruz. Same thing for Uros Medic. Medic goes from Alaska. Now he's training down at King's MMA. And obviously that's a very good change for him to get much better training partners and different looks. And, maybe he was the king, the lion of his gym up there in Alaska. But when you go down to King's MMA and you're training with guys like Calvin Gastelum and Benio Dariush on the regular, you're definitely not the king in the gym anymore. So he's definitely going to need to do that. I'm assuming the same thing will happen with Aalon Cruz. So I'm very much intrigued to see how both guys approach this fight with new training camps. Now, Uros Medic, last time around, we saw him in the Contender Series where he came in as a very slight favorite over Mikey Gonzalez. And Gonzalez just came in with this crazy Taekwondo style. But once he started to get hit by Uros, it just seemed like, the kid wanted out. And it almost seems like that for every single opponent that Uros has fought, even down there in Alaska FC. So it's very difficult to tell how good this kid is, given his very weak level of competition up until this point compared to Aalon Cruz, who we've seen go up against tested guys on the regional scene. Damon Blackshear is another guy that comes to mind. And even though he lost that fight, that was a fight that was very close, back and forth, a lot of clinching in that fight. He eventually gets finished in that fourth round via submission. But that fight, Steve Garcia, the Nguyen fight as well too, they're tough fights. And you see him go out there, use his length very well, use a lot of kicks. He's very active as well too, and that's one thing I like about guys that have that distance advantage over their opponents, especially the reach, is how active they are from distance. You know what I mean? Like, are they throwing shots out there, or are they just like doing enough to stay on the outside and landing a shot here and there? Whereas Cruz, it seems like he is early, often, and keeps that pace up over 15 minutes. It seems like he's more than capable of doing that. I give him the technical advantage too when it comes to the striking, right? Uros seems a little bit more raw, a little bit more green. The kid's 27 years old with only 6 MMA fights. So I'm interested to see how they both have rounded out their game, given that they're both in new gyms as well too. One thing I do want to touch on about Medic as well, his takedown defense looks porous. It does not look like it even exists. Now, is that the way that Cruz is going to look to approach this fight? Maybe. Maybe that's something that Eric Nixick, that's what his name is, Eric Nixick, maybe that's the way he approaches this fight, is let's just take this guy to the ground. He clearly doesn't look that good. He has some decent jiu-jitsu. Let's not get that twisted. But has he really fought anybody to a level that's going to push him, and if he gets past the full guard, what is he going to look like off of his back? So yeah, I question heavily the competition that Roche has faced in the past, and the only thing that you can really take away from Cruz is negatively, I should say, is what is his durability actually like. I truly believe that Spike Carlisle is one of the harder hitters in the game, so I think he's gonna, I don't see Medic really putting him out unless he lands like a beautifully timed and placed head kick. But I feel like he's going to struggle against Cruz here, who shows great movement, great distance striking, like I said, and great kicks as well too. So even though Medic will have a 1-inch height advantage, he's going to be at a 7-inch reach disadvantage, and I think that's truly going to be prominent here the longer that this fight goes on. So I'm going with the Cruz side. I'm going to say he wins by decision, like just outpoints him from the outside, maybe takes him down and rides him from on top for a bit. But that truly is because I don't really know what to expect from Medic if his fight gets extended into rounds 2 or round 3. Is his cardio just going to completely fall off the cliff? Let's give the guy the benefit of the doubt. Like earlier in his career, it didn't look that great, but he must be working on it. He must be knowing that, okay, I'm in the UFC now, so I really need to round out my game, especially my cardio, especially if I'm getting pushed later in fights. And this is totally a fight that could happen too. So don't fall into the trap of thinking, okay, Aalon Cruz got knocked out last time around. He's going to more than likely get knocked out by this guy who has a ton of knockouts on his record as well. That's completely false thinking. Again, shout out to AJ's MMA betting who says the same thing, right? Like, don't put too much stock into standing knockouts. Because again, the level of competition that Uros was going up against in AFC, the guys didn't even look like they wanted to get hit. So, or obviously nobody wants to get hit, but they didn't enjoy getting hit to the point where they're just curling up or dropping at any slight strike landing on them clean enough. So yeah, I think Uros is going to be in for a little bit of a rude awakening, fighting somebody that actually will fight him and make it difficult. So I lean Cruz here, and I'm going to take him to win this fight via decision. Livia, Renata, Souza versus Amanda Lemos, and we got minus 235 on Amanda Lemos, plus 195 on Livia Souza. Let's start off on the Souza side. Was coming off of a victory over Ashley Yoder last time around. She beat her by decision. And it was more so just, her landing the better shots on the feet in those first 2 rounds, doing some good work from on top with her grappling in that first round as well. But then giving up that 3rd round, it just didn't look good with Yoder, being the one pushing the pressure, landing her distance strikes and staying on the outside, whereas Souza seemed to have been slowing down a little bit. And that seems to be the wrap on her in her last several fights, where fights do reach that 3rd round, she significantly starts to slow down. And even in that Sarah Frota fight, you see her pull guard within the first minute or so of that 3rd round. And that's just not a good look, not the type of performance or technique you want to be seeing from a fighter of that level. Now, she luckily won that fight via split decision, but it was a close fight. You know what I mean? She was a minus 230 favorite in that Frota fight, and, she definitely did not look like it. Now she has decent striking. Her ground game is really good. Obviously a black belt. Takedowns look decent as well too. But when the fight is on the feet, if a fighter like Amanda Lemos is across from her, I don't think she'll have as much success. I think it's going to be very important for her to try to get this fight to the ground, which is where she should have success. But we just don't have enough tape on Amanda Lemos off of her back to truly make that conclusion that, Souza will style on her from the back, or on top of her at least. Or even finish her. If she doesn't finish her, how do the 2nd and 3rd rounds look with her, possibly having to work hard to keep Lemos down, and then her possible cardio issues as well too. The Brianna Van Buren fight, completely outstruck in that fight. It gave up a couple takedowns and obviously slowed down later in that fight too. And there's just so many question marks in terms of what Lemos looks like out for her back, and I think that's the biggest question mark in this fight. But everything that we've seen from Lemos, other than the fact that we haven't seen her off her back, looks quite impressive. Right, her fight against Miranda Granger, she does a decent job on the feet. The fight eventually gets taken to the ground, and she locks up this beautiful rear naked choke, but from a very weird position where she doesn't have either hooks in. I believe she was like, it was a very weird position, but she puts Granger out. I don't think Granger was even expecting to go out from a choke like that, because she didn't even end up tapping. She goes out. Lemos gets her hand raised that night. Then she comes back and fights Mizuki Inoue, where, the majority of the fight was pretty much Inoue pushing Lemos up against the cage, Lemos having a little bit of trouble getting out of those positions, but she kept the fight on the feet. she didn't get taken down. And whenever they were separated, we saw Lemos landing the much harder, much crisper, and more damaging strikes, which is why pretty much all three judges gave her a 30-27 in that fight. Beautiful performance from a distance perspective, but the fact that she was having trouble getting off the cage leads me to believe like if she fights somebody that's a much better grappler than Inoue, she's going to have some trouble. Now, I feel like she'll be the stronger woman here compared to Livia Souza. She'll be the bigger woman as well, too. 1 inch height advantage, 2 inch reach advantage. But when it comes to the striking difference, I feel like we'll definitely see Lemos pull away with it. Even off of her back foot, she's a great striker. And I think if this fight does end up in clinch positions up against the cage, I think Mizuki, would have been much more successful in potentially getting Lemos down than Souza will be. Souza might be able to get like an open cage takedown or something like that. She has some good trips, some good body lock takedowns herself. But if it's up against the cage, I think she's going to struggle there. And then again, the longer this fight goes on, she's probably going to be burning those muscles and she's going to start getting stressed out, and that's going to start to affect her cardio. And then we'll see Lemos potentially keep on the outside and really start to tag Souza. Lemos by KO is a solid prop in my opinion as well, as I feel like the longer this fight stays on the feet, the worse it is for Souza here. Lemos does a good job from distance striking. She's a far cry from what we saw from her. I believe it was in 2015 or 16 when she fought Leslie Smith up at 135 pounds. Then she takes a bunch of time off, comes back looking completely different, and also fighting 2 weight classes down now. So she looks strong. She looks good. Her last 2 performances, she did a really good job in terms of securing the victory in those fights. Whereas Souza, it seems like she's slowly starting to fall off. And that's weird to say because Souza is 29, Lemos is 33, but it seems like Lemos is closer to reaching her peak or even in her peak, in her prime, compared to Souza, who continuously just makes fights closer and closer every single time out. And then obviously her production and quality of work really starts to fall off later in the fight too. So I like Lemos here. Minus 235, maybe a little bit too chalky considering that we haven't seen her work off of her back. And, I feel like if that's the question mark here, I still like Lemos, right? Gotta believe that she has decent enough jiu-jitsu to keep Souza from tapping her here. The last time we saw Souza get a submission was when she was a minus 1,500 against Alex Chambers. That was a while ago, and that was her UFC debut as well too. And now she's just not been looking that great as of late from her last 3 fights. So even though she's 2-1 in her last couple of fights, I feel like her stock is definitely dropping, which is why she's a plus 195 dog here. And I think that Lemos' stock is definitely rising with her performances, her last couple fights out. And she's definitely distancing herself from that Leslie Smith loss, which was just brutal, did not look good at all. And now she's looking amazing. So I like Lemos here. I think she's live for a KO as well. I'm going to say 3rd round TKO, given the amount that Souza slows down and how much success Ashley Yoder had as well in that 3rd round from the distance striking. And I think that's the approach we'll see Lemos take here, is just try to remain at distance and just pick her apart from the outside. Hopefully she's able to keep this fight on the feet. But I do like Lemos here. I even like Lemos better than Carlos Ulberg in the spot, and you're getting a slightly better line on Lemos here too. So Lemos is just way more proven, not as big question marks as we have on Ulberg. So I do like Lemos here, and I'll take her to win this fight via KO in that 3rd round. Jake Matthews versus Sean Brady. Sorry, I just had a quick little brain fart there. We got minus 220 on Sean Brady and plus 180 on now the UFC vet Jake Matthews. And it's hard to believe that Jake Matthews has been in the UFC since 2014, where he made his UFC debut against Deshaun Johnson and triangle chokes him in the 3rd round. And since that, he's accrued a record of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 4 in the UFC. Obviously, he came into the UFC undefeated, but he's dropped fights to James Vick, Kevin Lee, Andrew Holbrook, and then Anthony Rocco Martin most recently. But now he's on a 3-fight losing streak. However, it's not the most impressive 3-fight winning streak, right? You got Rostam Akhman, who I don't believe is in the UFC anymore. Emil Mech, given the game plan that Matthews went in there, which is to go out there and grapple fuck him, not the hardest thing to do apparently against a guy like Mech. And then Diego Sanchez, right? Do we really need to say anything about that fight? I know a ton of people that lost a ton of money off of betting Jake Matthews to win that fight inside the distance, and he just wasn't able to do it. Now, what we see from Jake Matthews is just strength almost, and brute strength to a certain extent, where he just He's okay with accepting the back foot. He allows his opponent to kind of just dictate the pace on the feet, and then he just lunges for it every now and then, pretty much headhunting. Doesn't really go out there and try to mix up combinations or go to the body as much. It's more so just like a 1-2 combination on the feet to try to like drop you, rock you, hurt you, just like he did in the Li Jingliang fight, right? Lee was the one kind of pressuring the majority of that fight, got dropped a couple times, and that was what pretty much gave away the fight. But it was a very close fight, and you got to say to this point, that's his most impressive victory name value-wise. The Bojan Velichkovic fight, very, very close. I mean, we see Velichkovic get a couple of takedowns, get a couple of reversals, a couple of close submission attempts as well too. But Jake Matthews is able to gut it out and pull out a split decision victory there. And that was at 155 pounds. Now he's at 170, or has been for a couple of fights now. And you get a big, thick guy like Sean Brady. You're definitely not going to be the stronger one in there. So I'm curious to see what his approach in this fight is going to be, because I feel like Sean Brady almost has him beat everywhere, right? Outside of the actual UFC experience, Sean Brady is the better striker, shows great combinations, great kicks, good low calf kick, and just kick in general, something that Rocco Martin was able to do with very much, with good success, and eventually led to him getting that anaconda choke finish. Seems to be the stronger guy. You can just tell that by looking at the guys. But even in grappling and clinch situations, you see Sean Brady usually the more imposing one, usually the one landing his trip takedowns, getting those body lock takedowns, and then the jiu-jitsu. Daniel Gracie black belt is what Sean Brady is, and you see him quite active, especially with that guillotine choke. Something you hear Paul Felder talk about in his last fight against Christian Aguilera is that he's one of the toughest guys, or one of the hardest squeezes he's ever gone up against when you're talking about guillotines. And that was with Sean Brady, and that's what exactly Sean Brady was able to latch on to Christian Aguilera after I believe he got full mount, latched on that guillotine and was able to put his lights out relatively quickly. That's one of the quicker times I've ever seen somebody go from conscious to unconscious after somebody locked up a choke on them. So it's for real. And then again, the striking is another thing that I think that Brady just has an advantage in. A little bit more of volume, is willing to push the pace and dictate the pace, throws solid combinations and throws with a bunch of power as well too. So, and then if you want to talk about cardio as well, you go the Sean Brady side again, right? Jake Matthews shows that he almost muscles a lot of his fights, which leads him to kind of start slowing down later in fights. The Diego Sanchez fight, you see him slowing down later in the fight. The Mio Mack fight, you see him slowing down later in the fight. He's not as successful in getting the fight to the ground later, because he's just huffing and puffing a little bit more. Whereas Sean Brady seems like he can go that solid 3 rounds. The only time we've really seen Sean Brady in a little bit of trouble was the Court McGee fight. But his power and his striking bails him out in those spots where Court McGee's kind of pushing the pressure, staying in his face, landing some good shots. Sean Brady comes in return and throws some good combinations, cracks him a couple times, and wins the round back. But in that third round, it did look a little bit fishy, right? He starts to slightly slow down. But let's chalk that up to, UFC jitters, first time in the cage. And then after that, you see him go out there and fight a relatively harder opponent in Ismail Nardiev, drops that first round, shows great composure, comes back in the second, chases the takedown, gets the takedown, and does some good work from on top. He's a very good top pressure fighter, with control time, with submissions, and just keeping guys there and doing damage. And he showcased that in both of his last 2 fights, right? The Nardiev fight takes the second and third round there, and then in the Aguilera fight, he obviously gets the submission in that fight. Whereas Jake Matthews, like when he gets these guys down, sure, it looks great, but he doesn't really do the best in terms of holding these guys down. Most guys are able to get back to the feet outside of the the Mechs and the Sanchez's, but earlier in his career, the Li Jingliangs, the Bojan Velichkovic's, the Anthony Rocco Martin, Andrew Holbrook, he just can't hold these guys down. And even Holbrook, the way that he's getting Matthews down leaves me a lot of concerns in terms of how he's going to deal with the takedown game of Sean Brady, if that's the path that Brady decides to take in this fight. So I just don't see where Jake Matthews truly wins this fight. I think we've kind of, the jury is out on Matthews, where he's just going to be this middling top 15 type of guy, never really cracks that top 10, will always kind of falter to these guys that are just technically much better than him. And that's what I feel like we're getting in Sean Brady, is a guy that just doesn't know how to lose, right? He was 4-0 on the regional scene, on the amateur scene, and then he comes into the UFC with an undefeated record, and to this point has yet to lose a fight. He's 13-0, so all in all, he's 17-0, black belt in jiu-jitsu. The only slight knock I would give to him is maybe if we see him go out to a different camp and not a super camp per se, but maybe a well-known camp. But can you really knock him? Like, why fix what's not broken? He's having good success out of that training camp that he's in with in Philadelphia. That's where Paul Felder started up too, right? But now we're seeing Paul Felder jump around a little bit more too. If you kind of scroll through the IG of Brady, you see him working with Eddie Alvarez at times. That's kind of the main guy that you can pick out there. But yeah, his jiu-jitsu seems very, very high level. And I think that if he winds up on the back, I think we could see him potentially pull off some reversals, find himself on top of Jake Matthews. Jake Matthews has given up reversals in the past, multiple reversals in multiple fights. And that just leads me to believe that he's not going to have the most success here against Sean Brady. So I highly favor Brady in this. And I'm kind of stumped as to why the line is starting to come back down and Jake Matthews is getting some love. Like we had Sean Brady open up in that minus 300s, and now he's obviously down in the minus 220s. I'm on Bookmaker, I can get him at minus 196, and I'm very close to pulling the trigger and believing that he's truly my lock of the night play here. I feel like given the rest of this card, Jake Matthews presents the least threat to his opponent. Even though we have, significant favorites like Amanda Nunes and Megan Anderson, I'm not tipping a Megan Anderson lock of the night play. Even her inside the distance is minus 350. I'm not going to do that to you guys. I want to give at least a little bit of value, at least decent returns, nothing worse than minus 300. And if we're getting, just below minus 200 for Sean Brady, I think that's a ton of value. So I'll be going with Sean Brady here. More than likely going to be my lock of the night play for this week. And yeah, I think he wins this fight relatively dominantly. And I think he potentially finishes this fight. So I'll take Sean Brady to win this fight either by first or second round submission. Kenney Nzechukwu versus Carlos Ulberg. We got minus 250 on the City Kickboxing product, Carlos Ulberg, and plus 210 on the Fortis MMA product, Kenney Nzechukwu. So let's start off with the Nzechukwu side of things, who's coming off a win over Darko Stosic, which is quite a while ago. I believe it was in August of 2019, the same night that Colby Covington fought Robbie Lawler. And he ekes that fight out via decision, not to mention a couple points taken away from Darko Stosic in that second and third round. But Nzechukwu was doing a pretty good job in terms of staying on the outside and getting his punches and strikes off in those first two rounds. He did get taken down a couple times in that second round, and the judge did actually give it to Stosic. Unfortunately for him, point taken away, so it doesn't even really matter. Kenney Nzechukwu comes away with the decision victory in that fight. But doing what he does, maintaining his range. He's 6'5" with an 83-inch reach. So he's, more often than not taller than his opponents, longer than his opponents, and is able to get away with just like picking them apart from the outside. The Paul Craig fight, that was a weird one where we saw Paul Craig continuously rolling for the legs or dropping for, pulling guard or doing whatever he can to get Nzechukwu on top of him and try to get a jiu-jitsu game going. And then we obviously know that Kennedy, last round, I believe he gets a point taken away in that round, so he has to go for it a little bit harder, get some top control, land some good elbows, but sticks around a little bit too long. So there's one time where he, almost gets the triangle locked up on him, does a good job of sneaking in his other arm and nullifying that. And then you can hear Saif Sayu telling him to just get up and get away. And as he's trying to do so, Paul Craig, the savvy veteran, holds on to the right arm of Kenney Nzechukwu. And as Nzechukwu is like moving out of the way, he locks, kind of just pulls Kennedy back into him. And while doing so, throws his leg over the shoulder and secures that triangle choke and just immediately reverses the position, gets on top of him, and you see a tap right away from Kennedy that night. So, and then his previous fights before, again, he's getting away with knocking these guys out and maintaining his distance, but we don't truly see him tested by a guy that's a much better striker than him, which is what Carlos Ulberg brings to the table here. Kennedy is one of those guys that I think he'll forever stay green. Like he's 28 years old, but he'll just never have those like mechanics that are going to make him a great kickboxer or a boxer or a striker like a Carlos Ulberg or anybody else in the light heavyweight division that has solid striking. He's just going to get away with his length, his strength, and his athleticism. Now, we've never really seen him go out there and actually chase takedowns and try to get guys down and get control time, because that's obviously going to be his path to victory here against Carlos. But without actually seeing it on tape, how much can we actually put into that? How much stock can we truly put into that? More often than not, when you see him on the ground, it's because his opponent is either pulling guard or they fell to the ground or something like that. But it's never Kennedy actually like seeking that takedown. is he going to be successful in taking Carlos down here? That's the big question, right? There's no way he thinks that he's going to go out there and outstrike Ulberg on the feet. That's probably not going to happen. Ulberg has a very extensive kickboxing background, and you got to believe it favors him as long as this fight stays on the feet. But let's mix in the fact that, again, Kennedy and Nzechukwu is coming from that Fortis MMA camp that, run by Saif Sayoud, a mastermind who's probably salivating at the mouth right now, coming up with the game plan to beat a guy like Carlos Ulberg, who's only 3-0. And then obviously on the Ulberg side, you got Eugene Behrman in his corner, who's a mastermind in his own right. But how ready can you get a fighter who's just been dedicating the majority of his life to kickboxing, right? Carlos Ulberg, his first pro MMA fight was in 2011 against a guy that just started sucking wind after 2 minutes of fighting and pretty much just gave up on the stool in between rounds. And then you see a second fight against Martin Frazier, John Martin Frazier, I believe the guy's name is, and that guy just doesn't push Carlos. He just stays on the outside, allows Carlos to just pick him apart from range. Ulberg doesn't go too hard in terms of trying to knock the guy out, but just does enough to go out there and outpoint him on the feet, and was never in any trouble whatsoever. And then Bruno Oliveira, that's the Contender Series fight where we see Oliveira kind of pushing the pace, landing his own kicks and all that stuff, but never really trying to engage in that grappling realm. That's where we want to see Carlos challenged. And I think that Kennedy could potentially bring that to him. However, the kid's just so green, right? Like, I believe when he's going to be closing the distance, he's going to be leaving so many openings for Carlos just to land, straight shots down the middle that are going to catch him on the chin. And he could potentially knock out Nzechukwu here as well. I just don't see how Nzechukwu wins this fight from distance. It's not going to happen. I think we'll see Ulberg attack that lead leg, maybe Izzy style, like attack the calf, really start to immobilize Nzechukwu and then start to let his hands go. But there's just so many question marks. I'm not willing to go out there and lay minus 250 on a guy that has only 3 MMA fights and has so many question marks around him. But then again, I'm not running to the betting window to bet a guy like Nzechukwu who's, plus 210, but is always green and shows a little bit of a robotic type of approach whenever he's striking, and it works out for him. You know what I mean? He's able to keep guys on the outside. He's able to continuously punish guys from the outside. But how is his grappling game? How is his, jiu-jitsu game? Is he able to get this guy down? And if he does, is he going to be able to keep him there? Too many questions, and I don't want any part of this fight. Even the fight doesn't go to decision, right? That seems a little bit sexy just given both of these guys' resumes, but I can see this being a fight that just mainly plays out at distance, and we see Ulberg just, put on that performance that he did against, 2 fights ago, against John Martin Frazier. And we get a stinker of a fight where these guys are just, staring at each other, and we just see Ulberg ever so slightly just notch a decision victory because he was slightly more active. So, too many question marks for this. There's just not enough juice or meat on the bone, I should say, on either guy to justifiably make a play. Like, if anything, I think you got to bet Nzechukwu here just from value perspective alone. But this could absolutely look like Carlos Ulberg minus 500 the longer this fight stays on the feet. And given that we have so many question marks about both guys, this fight is just stay the hell away is all I'm saying. Do not be that guy going out there and parlaying Carlos Ulberg at minus 250 and then he ends up on his back and he just doesn't know how to get up. That could absolutely happen here. But again, we just haven't seen that from Kennedy either. So too many question marks here. I'm gonna side with the Ulberg side because I just feel like the kid's been kickboxing forever. Kennedy and Nzechukwu has gotten into the game a little bit later, and he's getting away on his athleticism, his power, his brute strength, and obviously his distance striking. But he's not gonna out-distance strike our guy Carlos here. So I'll go with Carlos, and I'll take him to win this fight via decision. But this fight is just a no bet from my side. So I'll go with Carlos Ulberg. Either decision or TKO, but I feel like we'll see him stay on the outside. So I'll go with Ulberg to win this fight via decision. Tim Elliott versus Jordan Espinosa. We got plus 105 on Tim Elliott and minus 125 on Jordan Espinosa. Let's start off on the Espinosa side of things, who's coming off a loss to David Dvorak last time around, which he got pretty much lit up in the striking realm. Not the craziest, but I believe all 3 judges gave all 3 rounds to David Dvorak in that fight. And I think the basis of Dvorak's victory in that fight was his knack for chewing up that lead leg of Jordan Espinosa, and you saw it, especially the calf. Right off the get-go, he was just chewing that up to kind of immobilize Jordan Espinosa, really take the pop off his shots, as well as slow him them down too, right? I believe that's the advantage that Espinosa had in that fight, was the speed. But we saw Dvorak go out there and just attack the leg right off the bat. And whenever he started to slow down or start to come in lazily with a combination, you saw David Dvorak really get his punches off and really stun and confuse Jordan Espinosa. Anytime Jordan went back to his corner in between the rounds, he was conveying that to his corner as well too, saying that he felt flat. But you got to give some credit to Dvorak there. It was because of the game plan that he implemented in that fight, and it didn't seem like a complete shellacking where it was like a 10-8 round or anything like that. But he still went out there and just did an efficient game plan every single round and really slowed down Espinosa and pulled off a solid decision victory that night. Before that, we saw Jordan Espinosa at his best against Mark De La Rosa, which was, sticking and moving, getting that jab going, especially with the speed that Espinosa brings up his jab, just absolutely amazing. But Tim Elliott, De La Rosa could do absolutely nothing about it. De La Rosa mainly a jiu-jitsu guy, so you're struggling to get the fight to the ground. And then anytime the fight was on the feet, Espinosa was pretty much just lighting him up with his 1-2 and mainly his jab. But it's weird that where it comes from, right? Like Espinosa carries his lead hand really low, and he's able to bring it up with such speed and agility that it just catches his opponents off guard. And not to mention it's coming from his hips, so it comes from all these weird angles rather than just a traditional, straight in front of your face and then just right down the middle. Whereas, it's coming up and almost like a shovel uppercut / jab type of thing at some point. So very, very effective against De La Rosa. Then 2 fights before that, right? Alex Perez and Machinal both put him out via submission, and very impressive submissions as well, which made it even more questionable about Espinosa moving forward, how he's going to deal with guys that have a solid grappling base. Now, with De La Rosa, he was able to nullify the takedown, so that fight was pretty much on the feet the entire time, so he saved himself there. But how is it going to look against a guy like Tim Elliott, who, I believe his Instagram tag or handle is at Awkward MMA, and that's the epitome of Tim Elliott's game, right? The guy's very awkward, unorthodox. He brings another level to the game in terms of just the creativity and just the awkward movements that he brings to the cage. I believe it was like the last round of the Ryan Benoit fight or the second round of the Ryan Benoit fight where he comes out almost walking backwards towards Benoit and just kind of like trying to freak him out or psych him out. But that's where we see Elliott like at his best, right? When he's going out there and confusing his guys and having this awkward, weird footwork and, just throwing the leg kick out there every now and then. The fight that was most frustrating if you were an Askarov backer was an Elliott backer was the Askarov fight, where, that third round, it was pretty much Tim Elliott marching him down the entire time and just not throwing anything. That's where Askarov was getting off in that fight, where, even though he was the one moving back, he was the one throwing the strikes and really touching Tim Elliott, and Tim Elliott is just goading him on and just like flexing and saying, come on. But Tim Elliott's not doing anything. Then we saw in the Brandon Royval fight, he just had a complete cardio dump in that after that first round. That's where we saw Royval pick up the submission in the second round. But in that first round, he was going balls to the wall for some reason. Comes out in that second round, huffing and puffing. Brandon Royval takes advantage, locks up a choke there, and gets the victory. But then we see an even better Tim Elliott the next time out against Ryan Benoit, where we see him, look good for the majority of that fight. I saw weird scoring almost everywhere throughout it, but I was somewhat impressed with what we saw from Elliott. Now, I believe his awkward movement is going to make it a little bit harder for Espinosa to get his game off. If Elliott stays composed and throws the leg kicks, often and early, I think he's going to give Espinosa some trouble. Maybe follow Dvorak's game plan, not to a T, but to the point of immobilizing Espinosa and then getting the rest of his game going. And I wouldn't even be surprised to see a possible Tim Elliott sub here. He has decent takedowns, and then obviously his awkwardness and the chaotic approach that he brings to the game opens up the possibility of him, grabbing onto Espinosa, whether it's a dart choke, whether it's a guillotine or whatever it is, but get this fight to the ground and really test Espinosa in that submission realm. And I think that we'll see Elliott very successful in doing so. Like, he's always hunting the choke. He's always hunting the dart choke, whatever it is. If you tie up with him, more often than not, he's going to be looking to either take a limb home or try to choke you out. So I think that might be his approach, right? Play a little bit on the outside, kind of confuse Espinosa with the movement, and then go inside and attack, a takedown or get into the clinch position and engage in some sort of submission grappling scenario, which could allow him to be very successful. And that's where I think he will be. So I even think I wish I had it available. I thought I had it up, but you know what? I'm just going to pull it up for you real quick. The prop that I'm looking at is Tim Elliott via sub, and I think that he could be very live in pulling it off here. So Tim Elliott plus 105 on the money line, and then via submission we got plus 410, which I think is very, very juicy given Espinosa's inability to at times to defend against jiu-jitsu players. So yeah, Mark De La Rosa not the best at getting the fight to the ground, and that's the last best jiu-jitsu player he's won up against. And then obviously the two guys before that, Alex Perez, really good wrestling game, and he was able to get the fight to the ground. And then same with Matt Schnell, who did a very good job in terms of getting that fight to the grappling realm. I think Tim Elliott will create that chaos and will be able to get to this fight to a part where he can take advantage of his grappling skills and put it on Espinosa. So I'm going Elliott. I'll go either first or second round submission. But yeah, I like Elliott here. I'm not 100% sure enough to actually bet him myself, but I think that he brings this weird game plan that Espinosa is going to truly have trouble getting his jab off. And if he can't get his jab off, I think he really, gets frustrated and he's not really able to get the rest of his game going. And, awkward MMA, Mr. Tim Elliott is going to make it very difficult for him given his movement, he's almost Jekyll and Hyde with his cardio because he looks so crap with his cardio in the Brandon Royval fight, but then he looks amazing in the Ryan Benoit fight with his cardio continuously moving and continuously going. So I'm expecting him to have his cardio in check here and keep that movement on Espinosa, initiate the grappling sequences at times, and hopefully wrap up a sub. I'll say Tim Elliott via submission in, let's go with round 2. So I'll go with Tim Elliott. Submission via submission, round 2. Kai Kara-France versus Rogerio Bontorin. We got minus 135 on Kara-France and plus 115 on Bontorin. And I believe we've been seeing a bunch of love coming in on Rogerio since this fight was originally announced. So I just want to jump on that. Yeah, we had Kara-France open up around minus 165. Now he's down to minus 135. And I kind of understand it, but I still find this fight a little bit difficult in terms of, truly figuring out who should win this fight. Now, I lean Kai Kara-France, but I know that he's always heavily favored in most of his fights, right? Like if you just look at his last couple fights, minus 200 against Brandon Royval, loses that fight. Minus 265 against Tyson M, easily beats Tyson M, who is very reliant on that knockout. Minus 160 against Brandon Moreno, loses that fight. Minus 185 against Mark De La Rosa, wins that. And then minus 265 against Holly and Paiva, who, in my opinion, got robbed in that fight. So we know what Kara-France's game is, right? Like the guy's a striker. He likes to blitz forward, land a couple of strikes, and then get out of the way. Decent takedown defense. He seems a little bit more active of a striker, which is why he was able to get away with beating Tyson Nam the way that he did. We know what Tyson Nam's game is, right? He just sticks around, waits to pops that shot, and if it doesn't land, then he just starts buffering again and waits for the opportunity to land that knockout blow. And if it doesn't come, more than likely he's losing a decision. So Kai Kara-France really bailed himself out and got the victory there. But when he went up against guys like Brandon Moreno and Brandon Royval, both guys create such chaos that it made it very difficult for Kai Kara-France to get his game off. Right, you got a crazy striker like Moreno moving forward, throwing all these unorthodox shots from all these different stances and these scenarios, and it truly threw Kara-France off of his game. And then you got Brandon Royval, even a crazier performance where he gets rocked early from Kara-France, throws a spinning back elbow, rocks Kara-France himself, and then they find themselves in this weird grappling position, omoplata position, and then eventually in the second round you see Royval snatch up that neck and get the choke of over Kai Kara-France. It almost reminded me of Anderson Dos Santos versus Tyson Nam, Martin Day, where he goes for a takedown and extends a little bit too much on the takedown, leaving his neck open, and Brandon Royval was all over that, getting that neck, just as Anderson Dos Santos did in his fight. So I think he'll be able to keep this fight on the feet against Bontorin, but Bontorin is just not a complete scrub on the feet either. He's not just a jiu-jitsu player. The guy has some good hands. He has some good striking and some good combinations too, but I think he's going to have a little bit of difficulty tracking down Kara-France and dealing with the speed advantage that Kai will have here. Obviously, Kai training out of City Kickboxing. I believe that's a gym that he joined after his time on The Ultimate Fighter, and it's done pretty well for him. A decent record in the UFC, but I just don't think he'll ever reach that top level, that flyweight champion level. But I think he can beat guys like Bontorin who show some slight deficiencies on the feet. Like, again, I don't want to completely write him off on the feet, as he was having massive amounts of success against Magomed Bibulatov. And then obviously the Holly and Paiva fight, I wish we saw that one go a little bit longer, but he took some damage in that fight. And then he landed that beautiful knee on Paiva, which absolutely split open his eyebrow, and they had to stop that fight via a cut. But last time we saw Bontorin was against Ray Borg, where he got completely out-grappled, right? Out-scrambled by Ray Borg, who's probably the scramble master. We saw Bontorin have no answer for that, right? Even though he was a black belt in jiu-jitsu, it's just another level when you're talking about scrambling with the guy at the level of Ray Borg. I think we even had a judge give 2 10-8 rounds to Ray Borg in that fight. And let's also add in the fact that Ray Borg did miss weight for that fight. But, what's new whenever we talk about Ray Borg, right? Kara-France, obviously not the level of scrambler that one Ray Borg is, but he still does a good job of moving around the cage. I don't think that Bontorin will create the amount of chaos that we saw from the Moreno and the Royval fights. And I think he's more of a traditional striker than he is a crazy unorthodox striker or a pressure striker. So I think that we'll see Kara-France, he might be the one on his back foot for the majority of this fight, but I think that his blitzes and his speed and his combinations will give Bontorin some fits in terms of being able to get his own striking game off. Now, I'm not the most confident going out there and betting on Kara-France, as he's always the guy that I look to go out there and fade, but I just don't feel comfortable betting on a guy like Bontorin, who seems to slow down a little bit later in fights, and I think that Kara-France could take advantage of that, but I don't think he slows down to the effect of looking like who guesses horribly after. He's not going to look like Justin James or anything after that first round or that second round, but he does slow down to the level that I believe that we'll see Kara-France be able to get his shots off a little bit more and maybe have more of a dominant third round than he had in the first or second round. So I'm going with Kara-France here. I think he's just a better stand-up fighter. I think he has decent enough takedown defense to nullify the takedowns that are going to be coming down from Bontorin, and I think that he has decent enough submission defense as well to stay away from the submissions of Bontorin as well. So I think he learned his fight from the Brandon Royval fight. Don't go out there and get these crazy types of takedowns. Stay within your means. Keep to your game plan, and you should be able to go out there and beat a guy like Bontorin. So I'll go with Kara-France. I think he wins this fight via decision just by sticking and moving, staying on the outside. Again, I believe he's going to be the one on the back foot, but I think he'll be the one that's landing the better, bigger, and possibly even getting a knockdown against Bontorin too. So yeah, I like Kara-France here, and I'll take him to win this fight via decision. Joseph Benavidez versus Askar Askarov. We got plus 100 on Jiu-Jitsu and minus 120 on Askar Askarov. Let's start off on the Askarov side, who's coming off a victory over Alexandre Pantoja last time around. Great decision victory for him there. That was a fight that was going 1-1 into that third round, and we saw Pantoja's cardio fail him in that fight, which allowed Askarov to look like a boxing wizard almost on the feet, where he was able to go out there and just pretty much beat Pantoja to the punch. And again, Pantoja being as gassed as he was in that fight, he wasn't really able to react quickly enough to kind of just counter or evade the shots that were coming his way from Askarov. But, great performance from Askarov in that first round to be able to stay out of the submissions of Pantoja and then, just get his game going after that. The Tim Elliott fight, right? We see him go out there, rock Tim Elliott in that first round. Doesn't record a knockdown because we see Elliott quickly snap back to reality, go for a takedown against Askarov, and kind of just saves himself from there. But that's another fight where we see Tim Elliott kind of marching him down in that third round, where you question almost the cardio of Askarov as well too. However, Askarov does a good job of, even off of his back foot, throwing shots at Tim Elliott, who just stupidly moving forward, hands down, kind of goading Askarov on, and doesn't really do anything about it to really assert himself into the fight. First things first, he's doing great by marching him down, but he's not throwing anything behind it. and that's the issue I have in that Tim Elliott fight. But the shining moment for Askarov in that fight was obviously rocking him in that first round. He did get taken down 3 times as well by Tim Elliott in that fight, but with a beautiful hip toss 3 times in a row. Beautiful work from Elliott there, but Askarov comes out on the winning side. Then we have the UFC debut of Askarov against Brandon Moreno, where he, that fight goes to a split draw. And I'm a guy that had heavy money on Askarov that night, and I truly believe he lost that fight, and I think he deserved to lose that fight. Moreno had a lot of success on the feet. He has a very unorthodox approach with his striking, but it was very, very effective. And then obviously the very chaotic jiu-jitsu nature of Brandon Moreno, he was able to have some success on the ground against Askarov too. Askarov obviously coming over from the ACB. I believe he was a champion over there, 11-0 before coming to the UFC. His win against Anthony Leon, you see him getting taken down with relative ease, getting controlled as well too. Not the best of looks in there, but then we see his cardio persevere at least, and then he gets a twister finish against Anthony in that third round. Beautiful finish too, almost an unorthodox twister as well, right? Like the twister is already an unorthodox submission, but the twisters that we've seen in the UFC are guys that are able to lock up the opposite leg of their opponent with their legs, almost figure four their legs, and then grab their top of their body and twist it. Whereas he had he didn't even have the leg locked up. He had it he had the body figure four almost like he had his back, but he was on the other side of him, and then he started twisting him. So great win from there. And then the Rasul Kanov, absolute. Let's go with Rasul. Second fight, the fight right before coming to the UFC. Struggles in that first round. Again, Rasul does a good job of getting that fight to the ground, doing some good work from on top, but you could see that the cardio of his absolutely failed him. Askarov was clearly the better fighter and the more, rested and more energetic fighter in that second round, which is why he was able to pull off a beautiful guillotine choke in that second round. Now, matching up against jiu-jitsu, right? Joseph Benavidez, who's coming off of 2 straight losses to Deiveson Figueiredo. That first fight against Figueiredo, winning every second of that fight up until the headbutt. Now, I'm not blaming one side or the other. It takes both fighters to kind of, create that moment for that headbutt to occur. But he was looking really good against Deiveson, right? Great combinations, in and out movement, great calf kicks as well too. Something that he's developed over his last couple fights that I'm very, very much a fan of. And, he was doing very well against Deiveson. I would have loved to see what the live odds were going into that second round, as Joseph Benavidez was making it almost look easy, staying away from the big power of Deiveson. And then headbutt happens. He's wiping at the cut, and as he's wiping at it, Deiveson just drops a big right hand on him, drops her, and then obviously finishes him. And then we know the whole circumstance around it, right? Deiveson misses weight, so they get an immediate rematch. And that fight, he just, right off the bat, it looked like Deiveson was pretty much just taking full advantage of it, right? It almost seemed like Joseph was very much, I don't know really what to call it, it seemed like he was impacted by that first fight because there was that lead right hook, I believe, that Deiveson landed right off the bat that initially dropped Benavidez, and then it just went all to shit for Benavidez. But let's take that fight out of it. Let's take the other Deiveson fight out of it, even though he looked really good in it, right? Let's look back at his other 3-fight winning streak. The Sergio Pettis fight, you could have easily scored that for him. Sergio rocks him in that first round, doesn't drop him, rocks him, wins that round. Benavidez, clear case to win rounds 2 and round 3. Close though, but you could have made that argument for him, and then he possibly could have had a victory that night. But he comes out on the losing end. But not to mention the fact that he was coming off a 1.5-year layoff as well too. So that's another thing that people should take into consideration in that fight. Sergio Pettis, not in the UFC anymore, but still a solid talent and a very tough out to go up against, especially coming off such a long layoff. Then we go out there, underdog against Alex Perez, finishes him twice. Beautiful striking in that fight as well too, and really cracked Alex Perez. The Dustin Ortiz fight, looked really good in that fight as well too, and then in that third round, absolutely out-wrestled and out-scrambled Dustin Ortiz. I believe Ortiz landed more strikes in that third round, but Benavidez only landed one significant strike, but controlled the majority of that fight. And then the Juicia Formiga fight, right? The guy looked amazing from the beginning. His striking looked great. Combinations, calf kicks again, something that really hindered the movement of Juicia Formiga. And then he was able to finish him, and that's at the ending of that second round with I believe it started off with a head kick, and then he followed up with more shots. But this newer Benavidez that we've been seeing since he came back from that hiatus and starting off with that Pettis fight, the guy throws absolute heat in his strikes. It's insane. Like, he goes out there, doesn't really show much respect for his opponents, and just throws absolute heat. And, it works out for him against Perez, Ortiz, and Formiga. And it was working against Davis and Figueiredo up until that headbutt, but since then it's just gone complete downhill. Now, I think people backing Askarov are just absolutely focused way more on the Davison fights than they should be. And then, yeah, obviously it should have a little bit of an effect on him moving forward, but we're talking about one of the best flyweights of all time. He's always the bridesmaid, as people are talking about, but like when you have Dominick Cruz and Mighty Mouse Johnson ahead of you at all times, it's not the worst thing in the world. So yeah, unfortunately, he gets the consolation prize every time out, but he's still a high-level guy that should go out there and do solid work against his opponents. I think he has the better stand-up here. I think he throws with same amount of heat, if not more heat, than Askarov. But there's no real factual evidence out there that Askarov is this crazy knockout puncher, right? All he did was rock Tim Elliott. What else did he do outside of that? You have a Pantoja that's clearly tired in front of you, and he wasn't really able to take advantage of that to the fullest extent. I think the cardio advantage goes to Joseph Benavidez. And in terms of wrestling, both guys are highly credentialed, and it's called out a wash. But when you talk about the actual scrambling of it, there's no way that this guy out-scrambles Joseph Benavidez. I truly believe that this guy will not be able to hold Benavidez down. If he gets him down, he might be able to get him down. Benavidez has given up takedowns in the past, just as Askarov has given up takedowns in the past. But I don't believe that we'll see Askarov. I think Benavidez will do a better job of holding Askarov down if that's the path that he chooses. And I truly believe the takedown is there for him to do so. We've seen Askarov taken down in all of his UFC fights. All of his opponents have taken him down. I believe Benavidez will be able to take him down if that's the path that he chooses to take. Even if this fight stays on the feet, I think his awkward in and out movement, his blitzing attacks, his speed is going to be a little bit too much for Askarov here. And then mix in those calf kicks that we've been seeing from him as of late, I think that's going to really mess with Askarov as well too. So I like Benavidez here. I don't really understand the Askarov hype outside of thinking that, okay, Benavidez has fallen off a cliff, but we can't just take that off of him losing to Davis and Figueiredo. You guys kidding me? He's been looking nothing but amazing since then. Again, up until he got headbutt in that first fight, he looked amazing. And then since then, it's deteriorated. But again, we're going to compare Askarov to Davis and Figueiredo? That's unfair. So I'm going with Benavidez here. I have a little bit of a bet on him. As you guys can obviously tell, I'm talking very highly of Benavidez here. I don't want to diminish what we have from Askarov on the other side. The guy's a decent wrestler too, or a good wrestler, has some solid jiu-jitsu, has some decent striking as well. But if this fight mainly stays on the feet, I have a hard time to believe that he's going to go out there and outstrike Benavidez for 15 minutes, or that he's going to finish Benavidez. I wouldn't be surprised if Benavidez finishes Askarov. I'd be willing to take a little bit of a sprinkle on that prop, that KO prop as well too. Mixing the calf kicks with some heavy of the shots that he's bringing from the top. I think it's going to be a tough night for Askarov, no matter where this fight goes. Whether it's the ground, he's not going to be able to hold Benavidez down. The only guy to get the most amount of control on Benavidez as of late was Dustin Ortiz. He got 3 minutes of control time, but that was like him struggling to hold Benavidez down, and Benavidez still managed to get up and out of that position. Whereas Askarov hasn't really accrued crazy amounts of control time. Actually, I lied. I don't want to. I don't want to talk like that. So let's get the actual numbers here. He gets 5 minutes of control times against Pantoja, who more than likely gassed for the majority of that. 4 minutes of control time against Tim Elliott, who had 2 minutes of control time against him. Brandon Moreno, that fight went to a draw, had 4 minutes of control time against him compared to Moreno, who had 6.5 minutes of control time in that fight. And then Pantoja, in terms of his control time, 2.5-ish minutes to the 5 minutes to Askarov. But again, there's nobody that scrambles the way that Benavidez does. I'd be very impressed with Askarov if he's able to control Benavidez, if wrestling is the way that he chooses to attack this fight. But I still think that Benavidez has this in the bag again. Faster, better scrambler. I believe he's still there. I don't think that he's completely diminished from what we saw, from the first half of that first Davison fight. And the two completely levels that you were talking about, Davison and Askarov here. Askarov could turn out to be the truth. But from what I've seen in the cage thus far, I'm not overly impressed to the point that I'm saying that he should be a favorite here over Benavidez. Again, I think it's the Davison fight that's weighing heavily on a lot of people's mind. And when you just like look at it from a microscope, it looks much worse. But look at it from a macroscope. Look at what Benavidez has been able to do over his last several fights, and not just the shellacking that I took from Figueiredo last time around. So yeah, I'm done. I'll go with Benavidez to win by decision here, but I wouldn't be surprised if he lands a knockout finish either. So I'll go with Benavidez via KO. Song Yadong versus Kyler Phillips. We got minus 155 on Song Yadong and plus 135 on Kyler Phillips. Let's start off on the Song Yadong side, who's coming off a victory over Marlon Vera. A lot of people are saying it's quite controversial, but personally, I gave the first 2 rounds to Song Yadong for his forward pressure. Great combinations, landed a lot of big shots on Vera as well, but then you could see the obvious cardio issues of Song Yadong come into play in that 3rd round, where Marlon Vera was able to get a couple takedowns, some good top control, and then obviously pushing the pressure the entire 3rd round. So yeah, he definitely won that 3rd round, but I did ever so slightly edge Song Yadong in those first 2 rounds. But still, like, you see the flaws so slowly started coming out of Song Yadong's game, as he's been, such a highly touted prospect when he first came into the UFC. Couldn't figure out how old this kid was either. Turns out that he's like 23 years old now, and he made his pro MMA debut way back in 2014, which pretty much puts his age at 16 years old when he first started fighting, which is absolutely insane. It's crazy that we're actually seeing fighters start that early off. Maybe you can get away with it in countries like that, but it's a good wealth of experience to have, over 21 fights by the time he turned 23 years old. So that definitely helps. In terms of the wars that he's been in, though, his chin issues might start to show themselves a lot earlier than they do for most fighters. But up until this point, his chin is held rock steady, so he can still go in there and take some good damage and dish out the same, if not more, damage in return. The Cody Stamann fight, that's a fight where we saw him lose a point, I believe, in the first round due to an illegal knee. And, he knew it right off the bat. And luckily enough for him, he was still able to come out on the, with just a draw. Obviously, if he didn't get that point taken away, he would have won the fight. But that 3rd round didn't look good either. Just like the Marlon Vera fight, we saw Cody Stamann get the takedown and pretty much ride out Song Yadong for that entire round. And again, just seeing those 3rd round slip ups give me a huge amount of pause. Now, more often than not, he's going out there and finishing his guys, right? The Felipe Arantes fight and the Alejandro Perez fight were completely sleeping these guys. And Perez, too, a guy that's not notoriously known for having a bad chin, right? He's quite durable. So to see a guy like Song Yadong put him out the way that he did, I was very impressed to see that. And he was obviously a heavy favorite going into that fight, right? Minus 225 favorite. And he continues to be a big favorite in most of his fights. But Kyler Phillips, on the other hand, is a guy that seems to have a bit of a career resurgence. Like, he had that loss to Victor Henry a couple fights ago, and even his time on The Ultimate Fighter, where he dropped a fight to Brad Katona. Since then, he's just been looking really good, right? He's on a 3-fight winning streak, 2 of them by KO, albeit the Cameron Ellis fight that was just heavily outmatched. He was a minus 370 favorite going into that fight. But even the Gabriel Silva fight before that, plus 105 favorite going into that, but put on a very good performance. We saw his movement very much improved, kind of a karate-ish style, very hippity-hoppity, and then still able to go out there and land the straights down the middle. Good combinations from the outside, great kicks as well too. So it pretty much seemed like he was playing the matador role in that fight, right? And that could be very similar to what we see from Song Yadong, who might be the one on his, pushing the pace, but Kyler Phillips does a really good job of fighting off of his back foot. Like, even while moving, he's throwing good shots. And then mix in the fact that he's a brown belt. He shows great competency when the fights do hit the ground. Apparently, he's been rolling since he was 3 years old. He's 25 now, so you're talking about over 22 years of experience on the jiu-jitsu mats. But obviously, maybe sometimes people over-exaggerate the fact that guys have been rolling since 3 years old, but at least they're privy to it. They know what's going on, and then as they're growing up, they've been around the jiu-jitsu gyms and obviously training themselves. And given the fact that he's a brown belt, right? He's a high-level dude. Now, I like what he's doing down there at the MMA lab. He has a lot of guys around his weight class that are very helpful for him to put together a solid game plan. Not to mention John Crouch in his corner as well, right? You have Casey Kenney and Mario Bautista, who are fighting on this card as well too. So you're expecting that all these guys are peaking at the same time. They're all giving each other really good work, and you got to believe that they're putting together a solid plan to beat a guy like Song Yadong. Now, I think the game plan to beat Yadong is pretty much going into play with what Kyler Phillips does, and that's move around a lot, throw combinations as well too, and continue to outpoint his opponent, and maybe mix in a couple of takedowns here and there as well. Whereas I feel like Song Yadong is just going to be continuously moving forward, throwing his heavy combinations. He's very light on his feet as well too. But again, I said his cardio issues are a bit of a factor here that I think that a lot of people need to take into consideration. So automatically, I'm already giving Kyler Phillips this third round if it reaches round 3, right? Song Yadong has a ton of finishes, so it is absolutely possible that I could potentially knock out Kyler Phillips here. But I'm not, I'm not going to put too much stock on that. You can't put too much stock into the standing KO, especially against a guy like Kyler Phillips, who has yet to be knocked out in his professional MMA career. His only loss coming via decision, official loss, I should say, coming via decision. And he shows great movement on the feet. Doesn't get hit the most, right? Like the Gabriel Silva fight is almost a closer blueprint of what we might see from Song Yadong in terms of moving forward, throwing combinations. Obviously, we believe that Yadong will be more slick on the feet, throw more combinations, and obviously throw much more heat behind his shots. But I still feel as though that Kyler Phillips will give him a ton of trouble in terms of just continuously moving. Staying on his bicycle, staying on the outside of the octagon, and just throwing combinations in return. And then eventually maybe that third round, just securing that third round by getting a takedown, which we've seen is very, possible given the success that Marlon Vera and Cody Stamen had. I'd kind of put Kyler Phillips in between both of those guys in terms of his wrestling abilities and ability to get the fights to the ground. So I think that's more than enough for him to at least secure that. It's all about whether Yadong is going to be able to put this guy's lights out early, because if he does, then none of this third round cardio thing matters, right? But I'm of the belief that Kyler Phillips will be able to stay away from those big shots, use his kicks to kind of remain at range. They're pretty much the same metric-wise, same height, but actually Kyler Phillips does have a 5-inch reach advantage here, which I think will come into huge play with him keeping his distance, staying away from the big shots, and getting his own combinations off without getting countered with anything too brutal. So I like Kyler here, man. I lean him here. I'm a big Song Yadong fan. I think he has a very high ceiling, but until we see more from him rather than just moving forward, throwing combinations and being quick too, that's one thing we have to give him. He is definitely fast, but I feel like Kyler Phillips will be well prepared for a fighter like this, and he should do a good job of, again, keeping on the outside, getting his combinations off, and then securing that third round potentially with the takedown, or even just keeping it on the feet and continuing his movement. There's not much we can take from the Cameron Else fight, because Cameron Else, the kid doesn't belong in the UFC. Let's be honest. That's why he was able to, get him out of there relatively quickly. But from the Gabriel Silva fight, from the If Kandu fight, I believe that was in LFA. I think that there's a ton of promise for Kyler Phillips and what he brings to the table. And again, he's only 25 as well, right? He's a young guy. He's somebody that's going to continuously be making improvements on a fight-to-fight basis. But given what we've seen from both guys, I like the versatility that we got from Kyler Phillips here. And I think that he'll be able to corral Song Yadong for the majority of this fight and then secure a decision victory. So I'm going Kyler Phillips, and I think he takes this fight via decision. Dominick Cruz versus Casey Kenney. We got plus 110 on Dominick Cruz and minus 130 on Casey Kenney. Let's start off on the Dominick Cruz side of things. Who's coming off of 2 straight losses now. One to Cody Garbrandt, where he got completely outclassed over 5 rounds, and then he loses to Henry Cejudo way back at UFC 249. That was last May, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, it was the first fight or first event back for the UFC from that whole COVID situation. But he loses that fight via KO in the second round. And we saw a really good approach from Henry Cejudo in that fight, which was trying to slow down the movement of Dominick Cruz, landing a lot of leg kicks and then eventually landing a beautiful knee just up the middle there, cracks Cruz on the chin, and then he follows up with a bunch of strikes to get the finish in that fight. The Cody Garbrandt fight, that's one fight where I feel like the difference maker ended up being initially Cody Garbrandt sitting in the pocket and waiting for Dominick Cruz to come in and throw. Because every time he did, he was met by a couple of punches from Dominick Cruz or from Cody Garbrandt. A couple combinations, a couple leg kicks, And I feel like that really hindered Dominick Cruz's performance for the rest of the fight. That's where we saw the confidence in Cody Garbrandt really start to, blow up. And then he was able to take over the rest of the fight, pretty much almost walking down Dominick Cruz to a certain extent, but just landing combinations almost at will, more than we've ever seen against Dominick Cruz, right? He's only had 3 losses in his 25-fight career. Absolutely insane. The only other loss he had was to Uriah Faber way back in the day. And then since then, he's been able to avenge that loss twice in a row. Most recently, his third win over Uriah Faber was only 3 fights ago. And if you guys remember, that was UFC 199, the same night that Michael Bisping knocked out Luke Rockhold for the middleweight title. So that's over, if you guys are keeping count, that's over 60 pay-per-view UFC events ago that he only had his third fight, right? Over the last 10 years, he's only had 7 fights. The guy has just been nagged with so many injuries, and if it's not his groin, it's his knee. If it's not his knee, it's his hand. If it's not his hand, it's his plantar fasciitis. Like, it just continues to catch up to him, and I feel really bad for him, right? You're talking about a guy like 10 years ago, he's 25 years old. And if you were to tell him back then that you're only going to have 7 more fights over the next 10 years, he'd be bummed out, but he'd still go out there and give the best that he could, because mentally he's a very strong fighter, a great analyst as well too. That's something that's really shining when he's since he's taken up this spot in the commentary booth. But the guy still has the motivation to go out there and train on a regular basis. Again, he's only 35 years old. He's going to be 36 a couple of days after the fight, but he still feels as though he has a lot to give to the game, and that he could absolutely go out there and just show these guys that he can still compete at relatively a high level. Now, the weird thing about his fight with Casey Kenney is that this is the first time he's fighting a guy that's not on the level of like TJ Dillashaw, Uriah Faber, Cody Garbrandt, Henry Cejudo, since 5 fights ago when he made his comeback after his initial layoff, and he fights Takeya Mizugaki and puts him out within a minute. That's the first time we've ever seen Dominick Cruz in that type of fashion, where he goes out there and finishes the guy that quickly. More often than not, his fights are going the full 15 minutes or the 25 minutes, because more often than not, he's fighting for a title or he's in the main event. Now, this is the first time in a long time that he's on the prelims and fighting a guy that's, up and coming like Casey Kenney, who himself might be maybe 1 or 2 wins away from a title shot himself if he's, if he's successful against Dominick Cruz here. But Cruz in that Cejudo fight still showed some decent movement. He still showed he had a little bit in his footwork, and that might be enough to actually get the win here against Casey Kenney. Now, people want to read a lot into that Henry Cejudo fight, but how are you going to go out there and compare a guy that's at Henry Cejudo's level and then take into consideration a guy like Casey Kenney, who, solid fighter. I think he's a good prospect. He's 16-2-1. He's only lost 2 times in his career, most notably to Merab Dvalishvili 4 fights ago. So is he at that level of a Dominick Cruz and the rest of these guys at the top of the bantamweight division? This fight should give us a good indication, but there's so many X factors, right? The step down in competition for Dominick Cruz, the layoff, the extended layoff, and all these types of things. There's so many X factors that it's really hard to make a true conclusion on how this fight should truly go down. But then you go on to the Casey Kenney side of things, right? Since the Merab Dvalishvili fight, he's had 3 wins. He beats Louis Smolka, where he was getting almost pieced up to the body for the first 2 minutes of that fight, and then catches Louis Smolka on a beautiful counter, follows up with the guillotine choke, wins that fight. The Elliott fight, he was pretty much fighting a walking punching bag from the beginning of that fight, because he was able to land his body kicks, and there wasn't much that Elliott was able to do in that fight. He pretty much just ate him. I was surprised he did not stop him in that fight, but that bruising on that body was absolutely serious. I was very surprised again that Haile Elliott was actually able to survive that. Again, great movement from Kenney, great distance management, good cerebral approach, not really overextending himself, but still finding the mark in terms of landing the body kicks and then following up with that left straight. The way that I like to compare it is like somebody was using a broken controller and playing EA UFC, and the only punches and strikes that he could throw was that left kick or that left straight down the middle, and it was successful more often than not. So good on him in that fight against Alateng. He looked obviously like that minus 370 that he was that night. Then he goes out there and fights Nathaniel Wood on a relatively short notice, right? That fight was put together very, very soon. It was at a catch weight of 140 pounds, so I won't look too deep into that fight, but it didn't look the greatest in terms of when Nathaniel Wood was actually, giving Casey Kenney a little bit of resistance there, right? We saw Casey slow down ever so slightly in that second round. And even in that third round, it seemed like a little bit more difficult for him to go out there and put the game plan that he wanted together. he had his wrestling to kind of bail him out there and, eat some minutes off that clock. But I don't think he's going to have that advantage here against Dominick Cruz, who, primarily a striker, but has a very good wrestling background as well, too. And we see it, in full use against Henry Cejudo, too, who was, trying to take him down and got a takedown or two, but we saw Cruz scramble very well, get back to his feet, and then start fighting at range just as he's most comfortable doing. Now with Casey Kenney, he's not going to have that wrestling to really lean on here against Dominick Cruz, and I think it's going to it's going to gas him out a little bit, kind of swinging at air. I still feel like Dominick Cruz will have the footwork advantage here. I think he'll still make it a little bit harder for Casey Kenney to get his shots off. But of course, it's going to look great for Casey Kenney to be fighting a guy who's going to be standing in front of him like Nathaniel Wood was, like Haile Yadong was. But when you're talking about Dominick Cruz, you're talking about a completely different level. Now, if Casey Kenney stands his ground and throws combinations in return, like we saw from Cody Garbrandt, then maybe we see, Cruz in a little bit of trouble. But is that what Casey Kenney is truly known for, right? Like we were seeing Louis Smolka get off on him pretty easily without much resistance until he finally ate that counter. It's a tough ask. I find it hard to want to go out there and bet against Dominick Cruz, who's only lost, 3 times in his career. He's 35 years old, so yeah, he's more so on the tail end of his career. And Casey Kenney is just on the rise and getting closer and closer to achieving, that top 5, top 7 status within the division. But I just can't get the best read on either side here, as I believe both guys have clear paths to victory. For Casey Kenney, it's just, countering whenever Cruz comes in, maybe try to push the pace on him a little bit. Whereas Cruz, just rely on that footwork, rely on Casey Kenney kind of blowing his wad, throwing at air, and then countering at the proper opportunities whenever you're closing the distance. Now, if Kenney approaches this fight I don't think he'll be as successful with his body kicks as he was in his last couple fights. But if he starts to target that leg, just how Henry Cejudo did, then maybe we'll see Dominick Cruz in a little bit more trouble. But that's not Casey Kenney's game, right? Casey Kenney mainly been showing body kicks and good straight lefts, decent combinations, and obviously his wrestling. But Cruz still has something to give to the game, I think. And I don't think he'd be fighting still if he truly didn't believe he'd go out there and compete at a high level. Especially, I don't think he wants to truly diminish his legacy either, giving up losses to a guy like Casey Kenney. And again, Kenney can go out there and potentially be a bantamweight champion at some point. So maybe in the future, having a loss to Kenney may not mean, or weigh as badly on Cruz's legacy as it would today or this weekend if he does actually get upset. But I think Cruz will still have enough in the tank here to make it a very difficult fight for Kenney, and we could possibly see a quintessential Dominick Cruz performance here. But I'm not willing to part ways with my money to find out. I do favor him at that plus money. I wouldn't be surprised if we see that money start to get a little bit higher, or those odds to get higher on Dominick Cruz here. But I found my dog already on this card, and I'm going to be rolling with him. But with Dominick Cruz, I think he wins this fight. I think he wins by decision. I got Dominick Cruz here to win this fight via decision. Thiago Marreta Santos versus Alexander Rakic. We got minus 155 on Rakic and plus 135 on Marreta. Let's start off on the Marreta side here, who's coming off 2 straight losses. Obviously, the John Jones fight where he, I believe, tore both knees, if I'm not mistaken. Sits out for quite a long time, comes back against a Glover Teixeira, which was a very, very tough test fight for him. Minus 240, comes into that fight, still getting a lot of public love, but then Glover just gave him that vet lesson here. I mean, continuously taking him down, taking all the shots that Santos was throwing at him, and Santos just didn't really have an answer for him off the back, right? He's not really known as being a jiu-jitsu guy. He's mainly a striker, and he was really almost helpless off of his back. But Glover, we got to give his credit, right? He has a very a heavy top game, a crushing top game, where he's able to go out there and get these big takedowns and then just float full mount without even, breaking a sweat or anything like that. So great performance from Glover Teixeira to nullify the striking of Thiago. And even in that third round, right? We see Thiago Santos hurt Glover Teixeira. Yeah, we see Glover, while taking damage, still able to reverse the position, then get on top of Thiago Santos. And, there's a lot of X factors going into that fight too, right? We had Thiago Santos coming off that huge knee injury, or knee injuries, I should say, being off for as long as he was. But I think that people were just continuously, which is why he used minus 200, minus 240, I should say. They continuously give Thiago Santos and Anthony Smith and Dominick Reyes, just that caveat that, oh, look, they went 5 rounds with John Jones. And, oh, look, Thiago Santos had a really close fight against him. So he should, it should rub off on him for the rest of his fights. And that's not really how it works out, right? I put out a stat out there. The last 4 opponents of John Jones have gone on for a record of 2-6. Not the nicest, right? I believe the only person to get victories in that time was Anthony Smith over Gustafsson and then Devin Clark. All the other 3 opponents, they haven't even gotten a victory yet. So very sketchy for sure. So yeah, we know what Thiago Santos' game is, right? Likes to go out there, get his Thai boxing going. Good leg kicks from him as well too, and even the way that he put out Jan Blachowicz, which was his last win, beautiful counter there. We saw Blachowicz crash forward, throw a combination, and kind of leave his chin out there. Whereas we saw Thiago Santos just wait, step back, throw a right, throw a left, and it stumbles Jan Blachowicz and absolutely puts his lights out. And so great performance from him there. Then the Jimmy Manuwa fight, right? Absolute fire. I believe that fight actually took place in Toronto here, and we saw him come out with his hand raised in there. But again, Jimmy Manuwa, Alexander Rakic knocked him out as well too. And then the Eric Anders fight, very short notice for both guys, up a weight class. I believe that was his first fight at 205 as well too. And he completely just outlasts Eric Anders. Both guys heavily gassed, but Eric Anders just could not answer the bell after that 4th round or 3rd round, I believe. But a very good win for Thiago Santos there as well too. Now, how he matches up against Rakic. Rakic, in my opinion, is one of those guys that are on the cusp of like reaching that top 5 to top 3 in the UFC's light heavyweight division. We got Thiago Santos, 37 years old, right? I believe he's going to be 38 later this year. But I believe he's at the end of his road. And having knee injuries at that age, not the best. Alexander Rakic, on the other hand, you're talking about a guy who's 29 years old, just turned 29, and it has a really good stretch of victories, outside of the Volkan Oezdemir fight, which could have gone either way. If you guys check out MMA decisions, I believe there's over 300 and something fan submissions, and that round 2, it was like 57% Rakic and 43% for Volkan Oezdemir. So very, very close fight. Obviously, those calf kicks and leg kicks had a huge effect on Rakic in that fight. So good on Volkan Oezdemir to continuously attack that and think that that was the best approach for winning that fight. And it was. Rakic had some great success in that first round, and then he, gave up that 3rd round, in my opinion, another very close round. But it all came down to that 2nd round. Volkan did a good job, moving forward, throwing his shots. Rakic was landing some big shots too. I think the fact that Volkan was able to stuff the takedowns really was demoralizing for Rakic as well, right? In most of his fights, he's able to lean on that. The Justin Ledet fight, I think he 30-24'd him on a couple of scorecards, taking him down at will, mixing the calf kicks, the leg kicks of his own. So it's very, very impressive how he was able to do that. Then the Devin Clark fight, right? Goes out there, gets rocked, and a lot of people want to lean on that fight as to why Thiago Santos is going to come out on top here. But since that fight, I think we've seen him pretty much, not really take too much damage. Even the Jimmy Manuwa fight was only 47 seconds. The Volkan Oezdemir fight, we didn't truly see him get hurt other than his calf. And then the Anthony Smith fight, just Smith couldn't get anything off. So I think Rakic has definitely learned from that Devin Clark fight, keep that guard high and tight. But I think that his grapple-heavy style, and, he's very sound on the feet as well, not to mention his calf kicks and his kicks alone. Right, Anthony Smith came out after that fight saying that's the heaviest kicks I've ever felt in my career. So that's got to mean something, given that Anthony Smith has a plethora of MMA experience and has seen all types of opponents. Whereas Rakic, he's singling out and saying this guy has probably the craziest amount power of kicks that I've seen in my career or ever felt in my career. So I think there's a lot of upside here for Rakic. Mix in the striking, be very sound on the feet, wait for Thiago Santos to kind of overextend himself, and then let's start searching for the takedowns, the wrestling. I truly believe he's going to be the stronger guy here. I feel like we'll still see Santos go out there and feel the effects of his knee injury from, even the Glover Teixeira fight. I feel like that's just going to have an everlasting effect on him, especially at this age. Rakic, again, he has great kicks of his own too, right? Thiago Santos has good calf kicks and good leg kicks, but I think that Rakic might have a little bit of an edge there. I'm trying to be fair on both sides here because I feel like Santos, he does have the overall advantage when it comes to striking, but I think that Rakic definitely does some good things as well too and has a ton of power. But I think his ace in the hole, though, will be his strength and his wrestling. I think that's what it's going to come down to. I think we'll see him, clinch up against Santos, drag this fight to the ground, hopefully close distance a lot better than Glover Teixeira was doing in that fight. Minimize the amount of damage that's coming his way, close the distance, get Santos down, and then just go to work. Whether it's seeking a finish or whether it's just, I hate to say it, but lay in praying like he was against Anthony Smith. But again, that fight was never stood up from my memory. I don't think the referee ever stalled him and stood them up off of inactivity. Rakic was staying busy enough that the referee didn't feel the need to stand them up. So I feel like he'll be able to do the same thing here against Thiago Santos, who doesn't really show much off of his back, right? Not the greatest jiu-jitsu off of his back. He wants to keep the fight on the feet, and he wants to swing them bungalows. Rakic, on the other hand, I feel like he's going to have a little bit more of a methodical approach, a more cerebral approach, and he knows he's right there, right? This is a fight against Thiago Santos, a guy that could propel him into that top 5, that top 3, and, maybe within a fight or two start fighting for that title. So, I like Rakic here. I like his approach. I like his strength. I like his youth. His explosiveness, his strength. I probably said strength twice here, but that's how much I'm banging on him to be the much stronger fighter here, and then obviously mixing that wrestling. I don't want to take too much from that Anthony Smith fight, as I believe that that Smith fight, he seemed almost broken after Rakic initially dropped him with that calf kick, and we just never saw much from Anthony Smith after that. Whereas Thiago Santos, he may look like a broken fighter, just as he did at the end of the second round against Glover, where he's just on the ground. His coaches almost have to pick him up and get him back onto the stool. And then he comes out in that third round and rocks Glover Teixeira right away. So you have to give him credit that he's always going to be in the fight. He's always going to try up until he probably gets taken down. And I think that Rakic will be successful in taking him down time and time again, kind of gauge his distance at first with his kicks. He's going to have a 2-inch reach advantage as well as a 2-inch height advantage. The guy's a big boy. He's a big boy, Mr. Alexander Rakic. So I think he's going to cause Thiago Santos a ton of trouble here. Rakic just has to be very careful on the feet, keep that guard high, be mindful of whatever's coming back his way from Santos. We already saw Santos plant and drop Blachowicz, while moving backwards. So as long as he keeps that in mind and closes the distance and drags this fight to the ground, I think he has a very good shot of going out there and winning this fight via decision. And I'd almost be surprised if he finished Santos, if that's the approach that he takes. But I'm going to take Rakic to win this fight via decision. I think it's just going to be Grapple Fest City, baby. So pre-fight, it might seem like this fight is going to be fireworks. But I think we see Rakic slow this fight down, minimize the threat that's coming his way from Thiago Santos, and cruise on to win a decision here. So I'll go with Rakic to win this fight via decision. Islam Makhachev versus Drew Dober. We got minus 335 on Islam, and we got plus 275 on Drew Dober. Let's start off on the Islam side of things, who we haven't seen since, I believe, September of 2019 when he went up against Davy Hamosh at UFC 243, the same night that Khabib Nurmagomedov went out there and beat Dustin Poirier. Now, Islam has been scheduled for a couple fights and even a main event against a guy like Rafael dos Anjos. Unfortunately, had to pull out. I believe some of it had to also do with Nurmagomedov's father passing away, but Islam is right back at it. He's taking the torch from Khabib, who clearly wants to retire and just sit on the sidelines now, but they're putting all their eggs in the Islam Makhachev basket, and I feel like he's more than willing to go out there and carry that. And I think he'll be very successful in doing so and replacing Khabib as one of the best fighters in the UFC. Now, we obviously know his one stumble, right? He gets knocked out by Adriano Martins, I believe, in his first couple fights within the UFC. And since then, he's just looked like an absolute world beater, right? Goes out there, Nick Lentz, Gleison Tebow, Cajun Johnson, Arman Sarukian, and Davy Hamosh. But we haven't really seen him face another striker like a guy like Drew Dober. I think the last guy we actually saw him fight that was a decent enough striker was Mr. Adriano Martins. So I'm very interested to see how he deals with a guy like Drew Dober. However, I think Drew Dober is going to be a little bit too gun shy here. I think he's going to be feeling the threat of the takedown pretty much at all times. I feel like Makhachev will be the one moving forward, kind of setting the pace and the tone of the fight. And then whenever that takedown opens itself, I think he'll be able to go out there and secure said takedown. Now, the last fight for Drew Dober, where he fought Alexander Hernandez, he gave up 3 takedowns. One in the first round, where we saw Hernandez do some good work from on top. And then in the second round, we saw Hernandez hurt badly plenty of times. And I think we just saw Drew Dober get a little bit too overzealous in those spots. And he gave up 2 takedowns while Hernandez was hurt. Good on Drew Dober, though, for getting right back to his feet, putting the pressure on Hernandez, and then putting him away in that second round. Beautiful standing TKO finish from Drew Dober. Probably the best he's ever looked, right? The fight before that against Nasrat Haqparast knocks him out in 1 minute, comes in as a plus 275 dog, and says, fuck you guys. Stop disrespecting me. He's going to go out there and he knocks that guy out. So he's coming off of 3 straight knockout wins, right? The one before that against Polo Reyes, where he started him relatively quickly as well, too. And now there's this new resurgence for Drew Dober. There's this new love for Drew Dober, especially with him going into that Hernandez fight as a minus 165 favorite. People are starting to recognize, okay, he's starting to level up his game. Team Elevation is definitely doing the good things for him and taking him to that next level. However, when you're going up against a guy like Islam Makhachev, it's just a completely different game, right? The Paulo Reyes fight, striker. Nasrat Haqparast, striker. Hernandez, striker / grappler, but still relies heavily on his athleticism, and Drew Dober was able to look through that. Like, after Hernandez took him down in that first round and Drew Dober got back to his feet relatively easily, you saw the morale of Hernandez almost take a dip, because at that point is when Drew Dober started to push the pace, stay in front of him, and dictate the pace, and that's where Hernandez truly started to falter. I just don't see him having that much success against Islam in doing so. Right, once he starts getting his combinations going, I think he leaves himself open for getting taken down. And Islam has so many different crafty types of takedowns that he should go out there and take down Hernandez with relative ease. Whether it's a body lock trip or a single leg or a double leg up against the cage, Islam Makhachev can get it done regardless where this fight goes. Now, with Makhachev, we saw him against Arman Saruki in a very close fight, but we do definitely have to side with Makhachev in that night. But that truly shows how good Sarukian as well is as well. And then the Davy Ramos fight, right? You don't see that fight really hit the ground until late in that third round, because Islam just wants to play it on the feet, not really give too much respect to Davy Ramos in terms of taking this to the ground and possibly getting submitted early. So let's wear out Ramos. Let's move around. Let's land our combinations. His striking is looking good from that southpaw position, and it was causing Davy Ramos some issues. And then eventually in that third round, he gets it to the ground where the threat of the submission is just not as enough. You got Davy breathing a little bit harder. You got him working a little bit harder, so he was able to grind out the rest of that fight. Against Drew Dober here, I think the only threat from Dober is the striking. Can Dober truly get comfortable enough in the striking like he did against Alexander Hernandez? I just don't think so. I think the threat of the constant threat of the takedown being there, I think is just going to weigh too much on him. He's not really going to get a shot. He might get comfortable a little bit, but then I think that's when the shot comes from Makhachev and we see him kind of ride him out. But I think that we'll see Makhachev actually get a submission here. Now, we've seen Drew Dober, I believe his last 3 losses have come via submission, and I think that the advantage that Makhachev will have on the ground will open up those submissions for him, whether it's an arm triangle choke, an arm bar triangle choke, whatever it is. I feel like we'll see him go out and get that kill. And Makhachev, he's got to get to a point where he starts pushing it, right? If you guys remember early in Khabib's career, a lot of people were just like, he's boring. Yeah, he's undefeated. He looks great and he's dominating these guys, but he's boring. And that's kind of the tag that a lot of people are putting on Makhachev right now. Just wait, right? Let this guy get a little bit more comfortable. And now that he's comfortable, again, he's been off for a year and a couple months now. But I think as he gets fights under his belt, he's going to get more comfortable. He'll be fine taking a little bit more risks. And I think that we'll see that here even against Drew Dober, where he has a significant grappling advantage. And I find it very hard to believe that Drew Dober will be able to knock him out. So, I'm going with Makhachev here. The line is not too wide. Makhachev is that good. He might even close as a minus 400 or minus 500 favorite once his fight goes down. So, I think he's a fine parlay piece at minus 335. That grappling discrepancy is just going to be so wide. And the fact that Drew Dober hasn't really fought a wrestler to his level as of late, I think that's kind of weighing on people's minds as to maybe Drew Dober is a live underdog here. Last thing I'll say, if you guys go back and look at the Beneil Dariush fight, we see Drew Dober have a ton of success on the feet with Dariush, who's just a little bit too wild at times and who gets clipped in almost every single one of his fights. But then you see Dariush have a lot of success with in the second round with getting the fight to the ground. In the first round, he struggles because he's trying to muscle the takedowns. Whereas Makhachev, you're going to get a more technical takedown. You're not going to get the body lock and try to tumble Drew Dober over. You're going to get the body lock. You're going to get a trip with it, or you're just going to get a single leg or a double leg, whatever it may be. Makhachev will be able to hit it. So I see the spot for Drew Dober where he could go out there and possibly get his hands going. Maybe this might be something he implements in his game. Maybe it's the calf kick, right? Maybe he whips it out there quick enough that Makhachev's not able to really catch it, and maybe he follows up with something behind it in terms of an uppercut or something like that. And I think that would probably be the way for Dober to go, right? Try to debilitate the forward movement of Makhachev, and that's by attacking that calf. A lot of gyms are taking that under their wing now, and I wouldn't be surprised if Dober truly sees that, okay, this has got to be the way that I beat this guy. But we haven't seen it to date. He's a good leg kicker, but he isn't really a calf kicker. And how successful he's going to be doing that against Makhachev over and over again. At a certain point, Makhachev is going to be able to catch that kick and get this fight to the ground. So I like Makhachev. I think he wins this fight by submission as well. So I wouldn't mind taking a little bit of a poke at the submission prop. Let me just pull that up and see exactly what that is. Makhachev by submission is plus 450. I think there's some there's definitely some value there, and I wouldn't mind taking a little bit of a sprinkle on it. But I do like Makhachev here. I think he returns very successfully, and unfortunately for Drew Dober, this is just the unfortunate path that he had to take to get to the top. And unfortunately for him, it's not Makhachev standing in front of him. So I'm going with Islam here, and I'm taking him to win this fight via decision. Or sorry, submission. What did I say decision for? It's not Makhachev to win this fight via submission. Round 1 or 2. Up next is the first title fight in our triple header that we have for UFC 259, and it's a bantamweight scrap between Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling. I believe this is the first title defense for Petr Yan, and I'm very much looking forward to it. This is a very stiff test and a different awkward style that we haven't seen Yan fight up until this point in the UFC, so I'm very much looking forward to seeing how this one transpires. So we got minus 130 for Petr Yan as of today, which is Friday, the week before fight week, and we got plus 110 on Aljamain Sterling. And we'll start off on the Petr Yan side of things, right? He's 15-1 coming off that victory over Jose Aldo, where they, I believe, fought for the vacant strap. That was after Henry Cejudo had retired, quote unquote. Maybe he comes back after he sees Yan maybe defend a couple times, or another challenger go out there and defend a couple times as well too. But since coming to the UFC, he's been on, nothing but wins. Teruto Ishihara, Jinsu Sun, Douglas Silva, Dion Judge, John Dodson, Jimmy Rivera, Uriah Faber, and Jose Aldo. Solid wins, solid stretch to lead up to that title shot and eventually capturing that title. But he does show some flaws in that I feel like Aljamain Sterling could absolutely exploit. Now, the fight that a lot of people want to go back and watch for Petr Yan in preparation for Aljamain Sterling is the Magomedov fights, right? I believe the first time they fought, they were 23. Next time, they were 24 or 25. But the first time Magomedov got the better of him. It was a split decision victory for him, but it seemed like the wrestling of Magomedov was kind of the deciding factor in that fight. Very much back and forth. And once you watch that fight, you really realize that Petr Yan's not just a striker. Like, the guy has decent jiu-jitsu off of his back, throwing up triangles, throwing up arm bars. Didn't obviously complete any in that fight, but it showed that he was still very dangerous, even off of his back, and not just one of those guys that's just going to settle off of his back. So, amazing fight there. Loses that fight, beats Ed Arthur, and then comes back pretty much immediately. So roughly a year after they had first fought, Petr Yan wins a fight, Magomedov wins a fight, and they rematch once again, and another barn burner, an amazing fight. But what we see is a lot more improvement from Petr Yan in terms of the grappling realm. We see him staying on the feet a little bit more. We see him stuffing takedowns, and then we see the will of Magomedov kind of start to break, not to the point of where it's completely shattered or anything like that, but you see the fact that he's not able to get the fight to the ground as much as he'd like to, and Petr Yan is really getting his strikes off, and he's the one kind of dictating the pace in that fight. So great improvements from Petr Yan in that fight, and I was very, very impressed with what we saw there. Then we saw him go out there, defend the title once, and then get signed to the UFC. And truth be told, given what we saw in his ACB career, he should have just gotten a title shot within his first or second fight in the UFC. But the 135-pound division is very, very stacked. Having to go through guys like Douglas Silva, Dion Andrade, John Dodson, Jimmy Rivera, and Uriah Faber en route to a title shot is solid, albeit the Uriah Faber as your last fight before a title shot, especially in 2019. Probably not the best look, but it is what it is. Gets a solid fight against a veteran under his belt, so that's a good win for him there, especially finishing him as well the way that he did. Uriah Faber is not somebody that we see get finished often, so that was a good notch to have on his belt. But the Jimmy Rivera fight did lead to some questions, right? There were large parts of inactivity for Petr Yan where he's just like kind of studying Jimmy a little bit too much, while Jimmy's the one getting the shots off, moving in and out, had great head movement and good footwork on his part, and was pretty much winning the first and the second round up into the last like 10 to 15 seconds, where he pretty much just got stuck up against the cage and then got dropped by Petr Yan by a pinpoint strike. And it literally I truly believe it came down to those two strikes. The two that dropped him at the end of the first and the second round. Now, that is more of a Jimmy Rivera problem than it is a Petr Yan problem, but true handicappers and true analysts will see this and see, okay, even though Petr Yan won this fight and seemingly dominant because he dropped him twice, there were still some flaws in that performance that, other people can take advantage of. Then you kind of see it in the Jose Aldo fight, right? You see Jose Aldo have some success in that in the first couple rounds. And that's more so due to the inactivity of Petr Yan, who's more so in like that downloading mode and kind of just giving away rounds and giving away minutes, waiting for the proper opportunity to lunge at his opponents and really to open up and start attacking. And you can't be doing that against a guy like Aljamain Sterling because 2 or 3 rounds into the fight, before you know it, you're behind, and you got to start really putting it on him and start to, get your rounds back and get your minutes back. And that could be his downfall in this fight if he's not able to put away Aljamain Sterling, who seems to be the more active fighter at times. Right, Aljo is not the most technical striker. Obviously, Petr Yan hasn't beaten that aspect. He's way crisper, way sharper with his strikes. Whereas, Aljamain Sterling is a little bit more funky, hence the Funk Master nickname that he has and that persona that he has. He kicks well from the outside, stays active enough, cuts angles very well too. We see him a lot more defensively sound now, it almost seems, after his knockout to Marlon Moraes, where he's not taking the most crazy amounts of shots. He's doing enough to just stay out of the range of his opponents. In terms of the range, I do want to bring that up. So we got 5'7", 67-inch reach for Petr Yan, and then we got 5'7", 71-inch reach for Aljamain Sterling. So he's going to have roughly a 4-inch reach advantage there. But his kicks are obviously going to be a huge factor in that fight as well too. Now, Aljamain Sterling's fight against Pedro Munoz is where we saw a potential key that could help Petr Yan win this fight, which is slow down Aljo. And by doing that, I mean chopping calf kicks. And that's not a huge part of Petr Yan's game. He's a kicker. He's not necessarily a calf kicker. But if he adopts that for this fight, I think he could have some good success in terms of immobilizing Aljamain Sterling, not getting him to move as much and kind of slowing him down, and then hopefully catching him up with his hands. But to date, that's not something you can say that Yan will go out there and absolutely implement in his game. Now, Aljo, like I was talking about earlier, kicks very well, moves very well, and then when he has his opponents in trouble, he doesn't overexert himself, right? He stays on the outside, like the fight against Jimmy Rivera, where he's just kicking him up against the cage. I think he hurt him. I can't remember if it was a punch or a kick to the body, but he had this instance where he had Jimmy up against the cage, and he's just staying at the perfect range, throwing his shots and then getting out of the way of Rivera's shots, throwing his shots, getting out of the way. And it was just such a beautiful sequence where you saw him dish out so much damage, and especially with his hands, which are secondary, in my opinion, to his kicks when it comes to the striking realm. And then you mix in the grappling, right? Then you mix in that crazy backpack pressure that and grip that Aljamain shows on the ground. Probably the better jiu-jitsu here, better offensive jiu-jitsu as well too. But I don't necessarily think that he just needs that wrestling to beat Petr Yan. And I think that if you hear that throughout this fight week, that people are saying that he needs to wrestle to win this fight, I think those people are off. Sure, it would be great if he was able to land a couple takedowns. But I think just him feinting takedowns, clinching, just mixing the game up as much as possible truly helps the rest of his game, which is getting that kicking game off, making Yan start to bite on feints or something like that. but bringing in that whole game where you're feinting takedowns, where you're feinting clinch positions, you know, maybe even landing a couple takedowns and being successful in those clinch positions, that will very much help him win this fight over an entire 25 minutes, as I find it kind of hard to believe that he'll be able to finish Petr Yan outside of a possible submission a la the Corey Sandhagen fight, right? So I can't believe I'm going to say it, but I'm actually on the Aljamain Sterling train here, but I don't know if I'm going to be actually be betting against Petr Yan here. It's so tough to go to the betting window and bet against a guy like Petr Yan, who just has that OG gangster mentality of just, you know, having a crazy striking game plan, absolutely insane Muay Thai, and the way that he just baits some certain guys into his combinations is just insane. So I like what we see from Petr Yan, but I just feel like he gives away a little bit too much time. And if this fight does go 25 minutes, I could see Sterling pulling away with it just off of volume alone. So yeah, I'm leaning with Sterling here. I'll go with him to win by decision. And with that said, I still want to see what he looks like in rounds 4 and 5 if he does get extended there, right? The Jimmy Rivera fight, he was running laps around the fight after that 15th minute mark. But the Pedro Munoz fight, it seemed like he was wearing it a little bit more. But that was a fight where he was kind of goaded into fighting a little bit more than he did in the Jimmy Rivera fight. He's definitely going to have to fight in this Petr Yan fight. So how his cardio looks in 4 and 5 is going to be very important. But I'm thinking that it's going to be good. Like he hasn't shown massive cardio dumps in the past. At least maybe earlier in his career he did. But as of late, he's been showing decent enough cardio that makes me believe that he should be able to go 25 minutes without any issues. So I'm going Aljo here. I'll go by decision. Not 100% sure if I'll make it a bet at this time. Curious to see how the line widens or closes as fight week progresses. But I'm going to be on the Aljo train here, and I think he wins this fight via decision. And new bantamweight champion Aljamain Sterling. Next up, we got the second title fight in our triple header for the titles that we got for UFC 259. And it's a women's featherweight battle between Amanda Nunes, long considered the GOAT at this point in time, against Megan Anderson now, who's finally deserved a title shot after it seems that's what the UFC has wanted for her ever since she's come into the UFC, right? She goes out there, loses her first fight to Holly Holm. Huge step up compared to who she fighting prior in the Invictus scene. I think her last opponent before was a 44-year-old Charmaine Tweet. Then you step in against a Holly Holm that's still close enough to her prime to go out there and showcase a full MMA game. And that's exactly what we saw that night. She got cracked a couple of times by Megan Anderson, and that quickly changed her into her Izzy-style wrestling. And she was very successful in doing so, getting this fight to the ground over and over again. And that's not a style that you see often from Holly Holm. So there must have been a little bit of a sting behind that Megan Anderson shot that really made Holly Holm want to change into a wrestler, and she was successful in doing so. After that, she gets Kat Zingano. We all remember that fight in terms of very weird. It was like a head kick that eventually it was like her toenail that scratched the eye of Kat Zingano, or just landed right in the eye. Very unfortunate sequence there for Zingano. I remember having the under 2.5 in that fight because I was backing Zingano very, very hard. But I'm like, why back Zingano when I think she's going to finish her by sub? So I might as well just take the under 2.5, and thank God I did, because freak shit happens like that. Which is a reminder why you should not be parlaying minus 1,100 favorites like Nunes, even though she is the greatest woman of all time. Weird shit definitely like that can happen, and you don't want to try to add a cherry on top and a minus 1,100 cherry on top of a parlay, because it just does not add that significant of value, especially given how wacky and volatile a sport as MMA. So by all means, I believe Nunes wins this fight. Just don't parlay her at this point in time. After that Zingano fight, we see the Felicia Spencer fight, where we see Felicia get her down to the ground pretty easily and then pull off her rear naked choke. And then after that, she goes out there and beats two UFC newcomers. She goes out there and beats Zara Farron relatively easily with the triangle choke. And then the Norma Dumont fight, if I'm not mistaken, Norma was coming off a significant layoff before coming into that fight. So she fought she was roughly off for a year and a half. That makes her UFC debut against Megan Anderson. She ends up losing that fight. And even that was a fight that was above her weight class. Now we see Norma Dumont, her last time she fought Ashley Evans Smith and won in the bantamweight division. So she was definitely outmatched in terms of size in the Megan Anderson fight. Now, luckily for Megan Anderson, the UFC's like, you know what? Maybe you're ready for a title shot now. Or given the fact that there's nobody else in the featherweight division, you're just next in line. So kudos to her for getting the title shot, but she's just absolutely outmatched in this fight, right? The only chance I give her of winning this fight is knocking out Nunes with some fluke Hail Mary shot, and it's a possibility, but given the implied odds, so the last time I looked at it, it was at like plus 1465 for Megan Anderson to get a knockout. Let's see what it's currently at now. Anderson by KO is currently sitting at, we got sub, but we don't have KO. For some reason, it seems like Best Fight Odds has switched up their stuff. All right, plus 1485 for Anderson to win by KO, which is just over a 6% chance that they're giving her. I did toy with the idea of just putting 0.1% on Anderson to win, given how crazy of a sport that MMA is. But then once you watch the tape, it's just like she doesn't even throw her strikes with the most discipline or technique, I should say. She's a little stiff at times. It just seems like an easy path to victory for Nunes to take this fight to the ground and go for a submission. And I don't think she's going to face as much retaliation as she did, or resistance, I should say, as she did when she fought a girl like Germaine Durandamy when she got her on the ground. Whereas I think Nunes will be able to kind of just slice through her like butter. Now, I told this to my Patreon members already, but I think that the lock of the night play for UFC 259 would easily be the under 2.5 in this fight, which is around that minus 220 range. Even if you want to get even crazier than that, you can say fight does not start round 3. And I believe the last time I checked that fight does not start round 3 is minus 175. I think that's like hella value. Either we get an early Anderson KO if she wins at all, or we get Nunes pretty much taking her down, softening her up in that first round, and then in the second round pulling off a submission or a ground and pound of some sort. I just think it's going to be too easy for Nunes to snatch it up. Now, Anderson obviously training over there with James Krause, I believe since 2015. So they've been together and training together now for about 6 years. But you don't really see a huge transformation, right? Like, what can you take away from the Zara Farron fight other than that, she didn't like getting pressured when Farron just came right out the gate like a bat out of hell, right? Pretty much swarmed her right away, pushed her up against the cage, and then was easily reversed as Megan Anderson was easily the stronger woman in that fight, drags the fight to the ground, and then Farron just looks like a fish out of water on her back. Then the Norma Dumont fight, right? Norma just clinches her up against the cage and starts kneeing her to the legs. And, you don't see much from Megan Anderson in those situations. You just see Norma pushing her up against the cage and gathering some control time. And then we see them separate. Megan Anderson lands one shot, plants Dumont on her butt. And in my opinion, you could have let that fight go on a little bit longer, right? It seemed like Kevin McDonald just jumped in right away as soon as she hit the ground. But like, she seemed like she had her faculties kind of about her, but they just stopped her right away. But again, you can't just take away this thing like, oh my God, Megan Anderson is this crazy knockout her. She's Francis Ngannou of the 145-pound women's division. It's not like that at all. You don't get any of that type of feeling when you watch her fight. I mean, if anything, like, we've seen Nunes get cracked harder by Germaine Durandamy, harder than she's going to get cracked by Cyborg and stuff like that, right? So I just don't see where the advantage for Megan Anderson comes here other than her size. Maybe she's slightly stronger, but I just think that the technique that Nunes will bring to the table with her takedowns is going to be too much for her. So yeah, I side with Nunes here, and I shouldn't be making this breakdown as long-winded as it is, but it truly is a very easy spot for her to go out there and win this fight. If you want to go round 1 Nunes plus 145, that's not a bad spot. Round 2 Nunes plus 300, I think that's not a bad spot. But yeah, I think Nunes dominates this fight no matter where it goes. But I think she's going to take the path of least resistance, which would be to get this fight to the ground and pretty much just seek out a choke, rear naked choke, whatever it may be. But I think she'll find that submission, no later than the second round. So I'll go with Amanda Nunes to win this fight via submission. Time for the main event and the third title fight in this triple header that we have for UFC 259. We have Jan Blachowicz defending his title for the first time against a middleweight champion, Israel Adesanya, who's coming up in a weight to go out there and be another consecutive simultaneous champion, whatever the fuck you want to call it. But it seems to be a trend over the last several years, ever since Conor McGregor captured the featherweight and the lightweight title way back at UFC 205. And now it's just becoming a trend. I feel like the flair behind it is just leaving it, especially when you got a guy in Jan Blachowicz who just won the title, hasn't even defended it against anybody. And Israel Adesanya, I think he's defended it twice now. 3 times actually. Well, he unified it against Whitaker, beat Yoel Romero, beat Paulo Costa, so he's only defended it twice. I mean, I know there may not be the craziest amount of contenders out there for him, but still, to go up in weight just so quickly, yeah, it doesn't really sit right with me. Anyway, it is what it is. We got the fight this weekend. Can't really complain too much about that. It should still be a great fight. So we got minus 230 on the middleweight champion, Israel Adesanya, and plus 190 on Jan Blachowicz. And the Blachowicz side is the side that I do want to start on here. So we're talking about a 36-year-old now in Jan Blachowicz. Is he 36? Yeah, he's 38 actually. 38 years old, Jan Blachowicz, and he's going on the best run that he's gone on in his pretty much in his entire career. Beats Luke Rockhold way back at UFC 239, beats Jacare Souza in a headlining spot. That was a split decision victory. Then he beats Corey Anderson in a headlining spot, knocks him out in the first round, and knocks out Dominick Reyes. The same night, Israel Adesanya defended his title against Paulo Costa. So he finishes Dominick Reyes in the second round. And it's something that he did very well in that fight against Dominick Reyes is uses a left kick to the body, which just pretty much wounded up Dominick Reyes right off the bat. I think within the first 2 or 3 kicks, you could see a very prominent bruising mark on the body of Dominick Reyes. And that definitely had a factor in how he performed for the rest of the fight. As we saw Blachowicz go out there, open up his striking a little bit more with his hands in the second round, and then one of them just caught him clean on the nose. You could see the damage immediately on Dominick Reyes' face. You see his neck, his nose twisting all sorts of ways, and then Blachowicz continues to follow up and eventually finishes him with the beautiful combination, drops him. But great work from him there. Even in the Corey Anderson fight, beautiful right hook to put Corey Anderson out. It's crazy this reinvention of, Blachowicz that we've been seeing as of late. Like, you're talking about a guy who dropped a majority decision to Patrick Cummins over 4 years ago. Then goes on a 4-fight winning streak over Devin Clark, Jared Cannonier, Jimmy Manuwa, Nikita Krylov, when he welcomed Krylov back to the UFC. Then he drops a fight to Thiago Santos where he gets finished in the third round. And then he comes back, goes on his 4-fight winning streak, and then captures the title. Now, he has that Polish power. I think he definitely has some power in his hands. He closes the distance very well, too, when he is trying to go in with the strikes. And he has a very high tight guard, which really helps him, defend on any type of counter strikes that are coming back his way. Now, he's a big dude as well, right? In terms of metrics, we're talking about 6'2" with the 78-inch reach. I think Adesanya has him beat, though, with the 6'4", 80-inch reach. But again, how is he putting that weight on? That's another question that needs to be answered tonight or this weekend. With Blachowicz, I feel like people are almost overlooking this guy, as Israel Adesanya has this mythical creature image that a lot of people don't think that anybody could beat this guy, right? And for good reason, right? He's 20-0 at this point in time, and nobody has been able to defeat him in the MMA realm, where he has obviously gotten knocked out in the kickboxing realm before, but in terms of MMA, almost a flawless performance. I feel like Blachowicz could cause some issues here, which is why I'm not so keen on going out there and betting Israel Adesanya at the minus 230 line. Now, most people might call me crazy, thinking that this is free money, but there's no such thing as free money in MMA. You know what I mean? I feel like if people continue to overlook a guy like Blachowicz, just as he's been overlooked in pretty much every single fight over the last little while, he's going to come out there and stun you guys. Given his power, given his black belt in jiu-jitsu, which should definitely give him an advantage here over the purple belt in Israel Adesanya, it's his power and his strength as well, too, that should have an issue. People can, point at the Paulo Costa fight as saying, oh, that guy was pretty much light heavyweight that he got dealt with, but Blachowicz brings a whole different realm to this game, you know what I mean? Like, he's a bona fide light heavyweight that is very, I'd say very durable as well too. You know what I mean? I think that he could be able to take the shots of Izzy here. Izzy might want to be a little bit more surgical with his approach here and really make sure that he minds his P's and Q's whenever Blachowicz tries to close the distance and tries to get his strikes off. Now, I don't think that this is going to be as easy as people thinking that Blachowicz is going to continuously blitz forward and Israel Adesanya is just going to piece him apart on these counters and really put him out that way. I think Blachowicz will be able to eat the shots that are coming his way from Adesanya. So this will need to be more of a 5-round fight for Adesanya to go out there and get his hand raised. Now, the later this fight goes, maybe those openings open up a little bit more, and we see the Adesanya's wizardry come to fruition, and he goes out there and actually knocks out Blachowicz. But I think that this fight goes over that 1.5 mark. I think it goes over that 2.5 mark. And if anybody finishes earlier than that, I'd almost believe that it would be Blachowicz. Like, I think he has that power to hurt and stun Adesanya, given the fact that, he's a big dude himself too. Again, when he closes distance, he defends very well. And then when he gets his shots off, it's not just like 1 or 2 shots. Sometimes he follows up with 3 or 4 shots, which usually, the third or fourth shot usually catches his opponents off guard. And those are the ones that are a little bit more damaging. So I still think Adesanya wins here, but I think people are just overlooking Blachowicz too much. I'm going to be staying away from this fight from a betting perspective. Maybe look at the over 1.5. I think the line is set at 2.5. I'd be comfortable with the over there. But, Adesanya has had some issues of his own. Like the Kelvin Gastelum fight really sticks out to me. And I know it's been a couple fights since then, and we haven't really seen Adesanya in any trouble since that fight. But something just glares out to me that, if Gastelum was able to close that distance, land the shots that he did to hurt Adesanya, feels like to me, this is the first time with Adesanya up at 205 pounds that, this is the first time he felt a 205er punch him the way that Blachowicz is going to be able to punch him. And this is the first time he's going to be dealing with a guy closing the distance the way that Blachowicz does. So there's a lot of sketchy spots here in this fight, but I do like Adesanya though, right? It's hard to overlook his masterful technique and his wizardry when it comes to the striking game. The guy sets traps, his feints are phenomenal. He's able to kind of goad you into one thing and then hit you with something else. But I just think it's going to be much tougher than people expect. I expect either a later finish for Adesanya or a decision victory here, but I don't think Blachowicz is going to go down without a fight. And he definitely has the power to make this a very tough fight for Adesanya, especially if he's able to catch that chin and drop him. But I think at the end of the day, Adesanya comes out of this fight pretty much unscathed and, picks up that title. Another angle that I do want to break down before I wrap this thing up is the grappling, right? The only time we've really seen Adesanya on the ground is I think Gastelum got him down, but pretty much right away he's like scooting his butt back to the cage, getting his ass right back up and getting back into the distance. Or even I believe in that 5th round where Gastelum was hurt and got Adesanya down, but right away what do we see from Adesanya? Throws up a triangle, throws up an armbar. Like the guy's just very active and aware of where he's at in the cage, especially in grappling realms. So I think his awareness very much helps him in staying out of bad positions, and I don't believe that Blachowicz will be able to get him to those positions. My concern is how strong will Blachowicz truly be against Adesanya here? How did Adesanya put on that weight? Is that weight going to slow him down? Is that weight going to catch up to him in cardio later in the fight? So given all the question marks that we have here, mostly on the Adesanya part, and I don't care how GOAT of a fighter you guys think this guy is, everybody, that image gets shattered at one point or a time, and Blachowicz has been doing a really good job in terms of turning guys back when he's not supposed to be doing so. So again, I'll go with the Adesanya side, given his prowess in the striking realm. I hope that he's able to withstand the power of Blachowicz, because Blachowicz will definitely land on him. It's not going to look like the Matrix where Adesanya is dodging everything that he throws at him. Like, Adesanya still gets hit. That's something people just overlook. Like, yeah, he's good at nullifying the amount of damage coming his way, but he still gets hit. And if he gets hit by the power of Blachowicz, I'm concerned. Let's just put it that way. But I do think that Adesanya takes this fight. Hopefully he sticks with the calf kicks that he brought into the Paulo Costa fight. I think that will allow him to have a much easier fight here. And if he's able to nullify the power that's coming his way from Blachowicz by taking away the base, which is where most of the power should be coming from, then he should be able to cruise for the rest of the fight, maybe get a 3rd or 4th round stoppage. But yeah, I'll go with Adesanya here. He's going to have to be very careful about the counters that are coming his way too, especially when he's throwing his kicks, because Blachowicz can close distance pretty quickly and with a lot of power. But I think that Adesanya does what, his masterful performance. Props to Eugene Behrman. They're probably going to put together a really good game plan here to nullify whatever Blachowicz is throwing at them. But I'll go with the Adesanya side. And I'm going to take him to win by, I want to say 4th or 5th round stoppage. But even decision comes into my mind. So just to be on the safe side, let's go Adesanya 5th round TKO. And those are the breakdowns. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Apologies for the delay in getting this episode out. Your boy wanted to make sure he did his due diligence for all 15 fights for you guys. But I will be getting right to work on the next week's event, and hopefully can get it out for you guys on the Monday as usual. But I appreciate the support. Make sure you guys like and subscribe the video if you haven't already. And check out Coolbet, coolbet.com, promo code MMALOTN2, and the Patreon, as always. The link is in the description below. Shout out to everybody that shows your boy support on a weekly basis. Man, I love doing this stuff for you guys. So I'll see you guys throughout the week. Obviously, Thursday, propping you up at 8 p.m. Eastern with me and Cody. Friday, final weigh at 9 p.m. Eastern with me and the rest of the odds crew. Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern for the MMA Lockcast Live. And then also we'll be doing a pre-lock show on Sal Vetri's channel. I believe that's going to be kicking off at 6 p.m. It's about an hour before the lock for DraftKings. But I'll be joined by a very special guest. So very much looking forward to that. I believe the first pre-lock show was a massive success with me and Brett Apley before UFC 258. So we're hoping to bring you guys similar experience for UFC 259 with a different guest this time around. Very much looking forward to it. So I hope to see you guys throughout the week. And yeah, good luck on your bets this weekend. Let's cash some bets. Let's make some money. And let's try to beat these bookies and try to get back on track. Your boy's trying to get back on track, and I'm hoping we can do that this weekend. So once again, good luck on your bets, and I'll see you guys throughout the week.